Hey, Bitcoin wealth builders, welcome to episode 88 of Bitcoin Hard Talk. This is the hardest talk about the hardest form of money. We break down the news and everything that happened this week in Bitcoin, this week in macro, and this week in geopolitics as we transition to a world dominated by Bitcoin AI and central bank digital currencies. And this week, we're going to be focusing on the big, beautiful war and surveillance bill. The bits that nobody was talking about enough relative to what is in that bill, because we have hit the next phase of command and control and surveillance. And we're going to be breaking it all down, how you protect yourself, and how we're going to be covering what happened this week in Bitcoin, macro, and geopolitics, and relating it all within that theme. So if you have not met already, my name is Simon Dixon. I spent the last 2 decades of my life dedicated to investing money in later Bitcoin. And we're going to break down everything. So in the Bitcoin section, in part 1, we're going to be covering everything that happened this week, as well as a little bit of a breakdown around who actually owns Bitcoin. How are we doing now? Is it becoming more centralized? And what is it that we need to do? And does it actually matter anyway? We'll break that down in This Week in Bitcoin. In part 2, we're going to be covering This Week in Macro. We're going to be focusing in and honing in on the bits of the big, beautiful bill, one big, beautiful bill that passed Senate in the US this week. And we're going to be focusing on the bits that people weren't talking enough about. What is the implication on the geopolitical landscape, the macro landscape, and then the surveillance side as well, and everything that happened this week in macro. And then finally, in part 3, we're going to be doing the next phase and the next moves of the proof of weapons network. The proof of weapons network that is a debt-based Ponzi scheme that is driven by a stateless, decentralized network of war machine and banks and a debt-based Ponzi scheme. And it shapes geopolitics while everyone's focusing on the government. We're going to be breaking down everything that happened this week in geopolitics and remind ourselves of the construct of the proof of weapons network and exactly how to protect ourselves. And we got some wins this week. So sometimes it's very depressing when you see the assassinations and the massacres that are happening around the world by the proof of weapons network. But at the same time, there are some victories. So we should celebrate those victories and make sure we cover it. So without further ado, let's jump straight into Bitcoin Hard Talk, episode 88, part 1, this week in Bitcoin. So if you haven't been following the stablecoin news, obviously in the West, it's dominated by the Genius Act and this new implementation of stablecoins, and the fact that many in the Trump administration and the technocrats and the technology companies and all of the major banks and financial institutions, they're going to be launching their stablecoins and they're going to be backed by debt, of course. Now, it's different from full reserve banking. From fractional reserve banking, because it is full reserve, but it's still backed by debt. And therefore, the rollover mechanism still exists. And in the Genius Act, it was made sure that many of the companies and the financial institutions and the technology companies aren't able to pay on the yield. So when you back a currency by debt, you receive yield from lending to the US government, for example. And the Genius Act made sure that they're not allowed to pass it on to the consumer. But my bet and my prediction is that there is at least one bank that is a major shareholder of the Federal Reserve that will have a carve out and is able to pay yield in order to get a head start and to try and get adoption of that stable coin within the Bankster network, so that it can be integrated with systems like FedNow and various other systems of the beta test of a central bank digital currency integrated with a stable coin. And I bet your bottom dollar that that bank will be none other than JP Morgan itself, the primary architect, or one of the architects at the creature of Jekyll Island in 1913, the Morgan family that created this debt-based Ponzi scheme and proof of weapons network. And when the original Morgan passed away, 80% of his estate was in the hands of other people, other architects, European banks like the Rothschild family network that have now been wrapped up into this proof of weapons network via trust companies and now consolidated into the asset managers like BlackRock, State Street, and Vanguard and public companies. We're going to be digging a little bit deeper into the proof of weapons network in part 3. But for now, Russia quietly launched a few months ago a new Russian ruby-backed stablecoin. I always say that. Was it rupee or ruple? I always get those that one wrong. Ruple, a Russian ruble-backed stablecoin. And it's called A7A5. You can look it up. It's got a website. And it's quietly moved more than about $9.3 billion in just the last 4 months. And I think it's being integrated and is used to convert essentially rubles into a stable coin. And then that stable coin is integrated into other stable coins like USDT. And so this is one of the unwritten mechanisms, because remember, the proof of weapons network is a global network. It is invested in a multipolar world. It is invested in BRICS, and its host country is the US capital market. It's more than happy to use the dollar in order to support other parts of its portfolio, because even though it's hosted in America, these large multinational financial institutions, they have no allegiance to any one country. And so therefore, if they can have a network that integrates with these stable coins and is integrated with some of these different networks, then I think those are all being beta tested right now. And really that bypasses Western sanctions to a certain degree. And it's done via some of the offshore rails. And so we don't have any type of BRICS currency at this point. But the point of de-dollarization was to have a resistance against global hegemon power, so that therefore the dollar has to retreat and then negotiate in these currency wars. And this is certainly playing out the way that it had desired, we imagined it would. And so those alternative rails are being built, and the BRICS countries are all trading with each other within these networks. And eventually, because they've created such a resistance, and Bitcoin can sit in the middle as a geopolitically neutral currency for all of these different networks to clear into, then you get a resistance and therefore more negotiation and more peace. So peaceful proof of work, which is back in the Bitcoin network, is actually, I think, starting to have its first signs of impact in terms of the negotiations that we're witnessing right now. And so while many people in the world think that this is more war than ever moving to World War III, if you've been following the money and you're a long-term listener to Bitcoin Hard Talk, you'll know that when we follow the money, that we avoided World War III, and there is a new order being set up and the final battles are being fought. We'll cover more of those of what happened this week in part 3. But anyway, it's an expected workaround, and stablecoins are starting to be used. But remember, stablecoins involve integration with banks, or they're backed by government debt. And so therefore, they're like a go-between between the fiat currency world backed by full reserve banking. There's still a debt-based Ponzi scheme, but they allow you to transact in an innocent until proven guilty system, whereas a bank account is a guilty until proven innocent system, because you can't make the transaction until the bank approves it. And that can be politicized, it can be weaponized, it can engage in censorship, and all sorts of rules and regulations are set up around that. So we look forward to tracking as the stable coins get more penetration. And we're just starting to see early signs of more of those non-dollar stable coins starting to get a bit more penetration in the world as well. At the same time, the Financial Times came out this week, and it started to talk about, we've obviously been talking about the New York Stock Exchange and all these Bitcoin treasury companies, and also the different crypto plays and stable coins. The FT said that London, basically, the listed companies, they're all pulling into Bitcoin. They're all getting involved in Bitcoin as well. And so what it does is, in a world where your pension, for example, is not caught up to the changes, and maybe you can't buy Bitcoin through your pension, they've created these mechanisms for you to be able to do it within their control structure. Now, remember, Bitcoin with them is not Bitcoin. It is a Bitcoin IOU or a Bitcoin derivative or a Bitcoin represented by a share, which is not a Bitcoin. It is only when you own your own Bitcoin. So for example, when I used to work, it's been 20 years since I was working in investment banking in the corporate world. Wow, time flies by. But in that, 20 years ago, I ended up with a bit of a legacy pension. And you get massive penalties if you cash those out early, and sometimes you can't. And so I wanted to get exposure to Bitcoin. Initially, I put it in a gold ETF. And then there was this obscure product like a Swiss franc or a Swedish krona denominated Bitcoin trust. And I was able to get exposure all the way up. And obviously, it outperformed anything the pension was doing when I moved to self-invested. But I didn't mean that pension is my whole retirement, because I kind of treat a pension in the legacy system as something that could be taken away at some point. I don't want to scare people or anything like this, but the whole point of Bitcoin is that you're able to hedge against some of the things that centralized custodians can do when integrated by a falling empire and desperate laws that are getting ever more restricted, as we are seeing right now with this big, beautiful bill. Anyway, it's saying that more and more people are piling into Bitcoin, and these public companies are giving people a way of getting exposure. My recommendation is to always focus on building your Bitcoin in self-custody. But sometimes, like me, you may have some legacy financial products that you need to play around in the TradFi world. And this is one way that people are getting exposure to that as well. Speaking of which, we're starting to see more and more tech companies that are now starting to get into the IPO market under the Trump administration. So they're looking to go public. I mean, one of the very successful ones that I invested in many, many years ago was a company called Circle that just went public, and it did incredibly well through the public offering. But one of the companies you may have heard of is a design company. If you're involved in designing tech, you probably would have heard of Figma. I know our tech team have used it at Bank to the Future. But they revealed on Tuesday that that Figma has been adding Bitcoin to its treasury. And it disclosed that its Bitcoin position is $69.5 million. It's holding it via a Bitcoin ETF. So it's held in custody via an ETF. But that's the holding now. And that accounts for approximately 4.5% of the cash and securities portfolio that the company holds. So it's interesting that these technology companies like Figma have been allocating approximately 5% of their treasury to Bitcoin or Bitcoin ETFs as part of their, and they've been doing it via securities as well. And what tends to happen is anybody that has been involved in owning more Bitcoin this month than the previous month and doing that for a minimum of 4 years, as I've been guiding people and telling people to do ever since Bitcoin was $3 in 2011, anybody that's done that, they end up with a little percentage of their portfolio in Bitcoin. And as Bitcoin historically has outperformed every asset class, every fund manager, every real estate transaction, every bond, every security, anything, every alternative investment, every private equity, every public equity, with the exception of a few, I think Nvidia might have caught up with Bitcoin in the more recent years, but not if you were there in early as well. But what tends to happen is it starts with a 5% allocation, and then as it outperforms, it becomes like a 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, and then it gets a bigger and bigger allocation. And what we're starting to see is that some people are like, wow, that Bitcoin outperformed the business. And then people are starting to really adjust to these trends, recognizing that there's lots of artificial intelligence and disruption. And we're starting to see this emergence of hard money ushering in more performance, less likely to go bankruptcy, and just a more stable wealth-based environment than the debt-based fiat currency proof of weapons network that relies upon debt slavery, war, and violence in order to perpetuate its debt-based Ponzi scheme. So it's really interesting to see that. And they announced this ahead of their public offering. And so, this is a public company that's going to be going. It's a multi-million-dollar investment. And they've been doing that for more than a year. So how many other companies are there that have been quietly holding some of their treasury in Bitcoin? And so it's going to be seeking a listing on the New York Stock Exchange. And this just adds to more and more companies. And again, I'm not recommending anybody to invest in any of these things. I think holding Bitcoin in self-custody, I think opting out of the system, I think boycotting Wall Street is the way that we can make change. But I'm just sharing how many of these companies kind of having a speculative attack and is eating the debt capital markets, is eating the equity capital markets, is eating treasury reserves, and is providing an alternative to those engaging in the debt-based Ponzi scheme. And even in the future, as the price goes up, if it continues, I can't give you financial advice. I still continue to believe it will, just based upon its fixed supply. You may end up getting Bitcoin denominated share buybacks and all sorts of constructs that are coming in. And you can bet your bottom dollar that Wall Street's all over it right now. As I said, the real game is Bitcoin in self-custody as a peaceful boycott against the proof of weapons network. And once we all do that, then the world can change. So I'm going to share some successful strategies that has actually had real impact in part 3 in the geopolitical section. But speaking of the banksters and the proof of weapons network, one by one, they're starting to realize that they need to hedge themselves and accept this reality. I remember way back in the day, I think when I used to give presentations around about 2014, we used to have proof of weapons network banksters like Blythe Masters that would go around and say, hey, Bitcoin's a scam, but the blockchain technology changes the world. And she went around across all the asset managers. And I remember Jeffrey's Investment Bank asked me to do a tour across the world, speaking to all of the capital managers and money managers that were managing much of the world. And then I was really focused on Bitcoin adoption. And I was telling them self-custody, and they were all doing it on their own, but they couldn't do it within the institutional construct. But now we're starting to see more and more of them do that. And as a result, Germany's largest bank, Deutsche Bank, is set to launch a crypto custody service in 2026, was the announcement. And this one is very symbolic for me, not the Deutsche Bank. But my last corporate career was in 2006. And I was working in the city of London for a bank called KBC. And this is when I really started studying monetary reform on the side and realized that very few people in the bank, they're just like a cog in a wheel. You know, I used to do 100 hours a week, working as hard as I can to try and climb the corporate ladder after I was molded into, you know, an investment banking machine through the university system, you know, where I was taught about Keynesian economics and debt-based systems, never taught about Austrian economics, hard money, and what you need to know in order to beat the system, and what, you know, real type of education that we teach on Bitcoin Hard Talk. But anyway, KBC is Belgium's largest bank, and it is now planning, it announced this week, to offer its retail customers that they'll be able to, through the bank, invest in Bitcoin and ETH. And it's going to be launching a new platform to do that, which is called Bolero. So it's not launching its new Bolero platform. And the idea is they want your Bitcoin. They want to charge custody fees on your Bitcoin. They want to hold your Bitcoin. They want to offer collateralized loans against your Bitcoin. And all of this infrastructure is picking up. And we, the people, need to resist against that and recognize that Bitcoin held in self-custody is how you escape the shekels of the debt-based Ponzi scheme and you don't allow them to use your Bitcoin in order to lever it up. And we're going to have this two-tiered system, Bitcoin in custody, Bitcoin in self-custody. Now, the beautiful thing is that proof of work was designed. It doesn't matter who holds it because it's a bearer asset. You can own your own money, you can spend your own money, and you will benefit from the fixed money supply, whether you hold it in custody or self-custody, and you can hedge it too. And I'm going to be putting up a blog this week with a debate that I did with some TradFi pundits, some entrepreneurs, some that were engaging in the political process, and myself, where we were debating self-custody and custody. So look out on simondixon.com in the blog section. We'll make sure we put that up so you can understand a little bit about the difference as well. But anyway, with KBC, my last corporate role at KBC, it was in the investment bank, 2006. That was when I walked away and I started giving lectures on monetary reform from all the studying that I was doing. I remember my father, he lost all of his money in the dot-com boom and bust in 2000. He went from absolutely nothing, went through World War II, went from rags, made his first £1 million, and then lost all his money in the stock market. And it was that painful experience that drove me to want to understand everything about money. So I did a master's in economics and studied through that route. Instead of going in there, I ended up working at the investment bank, greasing the machine. And by studying on the side, I was able to exit the brain conditioning of the economics textbooks, which were teaching you how to be a debt slave for the system. And it all starts at university and college, where they make you take on these loans, and I could never escape the system. Then you take your mortgage and you take your credit card debt. And before you know it, everyone thinks you're wealthy, you got a good job, but all you're doing is paying the bank every month for all your debt, and you can never quite escape the system. And suddenly you're going into the mortgage system and you're a debt slave for the rest of your life. That's how the system was designed. And they want people that have those jobs so that you just literally work for interest. And then you grease the inflation wheel as the debt-based Ponzi scheme requires more and more debt from individuals, corporations, and governments. And that's where the proof of weapons war concept comes through. But anyway, I started giving lectures then on monetary reform around about 2006. And as I wrote that book, Bank to the Future, Protect Your Future Before Governments Go Bust, covered Bitcoin. It was the first published book in the world to include Bitcoin. And that led me to speaking and launching the book at the first Bitcoin conference in Europe, in Prague, when Bitcoin was trading at just $3. And now today, the very same bank is now discovering Bitcoin itself. Now, I don't give a damn whether they're offering, Bitcoin financial services. I'll continue to educate people, but it just brought me back to the journey that we've shared. And even on this YouTube channel, we're about to pass 100,000 subscribers. But way back in those early days, you'll see a younger version of me, where I was going on TEDx and talking about the debt-based Ponzi scheme. Go way back to the video at the beginning of this YouTube. And you'll see me giving some of those early presentations, even the first Bitcoin conference as well. But it was a very symbolic journey, and it just took me back that KBC is now getting into Bitcoin as well. How the world has changed. But I will continue to warn people against that debt-based Ponzi scheme and that proof of weapons network, and give you the ability to understand why you should boycott the Fed by owning Bitcoin, why you should hold it in self-custody rather than BlackRock, because they want your Bitcoin as well. And make sure that you boycott BlackRock with self-custody and all the other parts of it. So speaking about BlackRock, let's have a little bit look at how they're getting on with this proof of weapons network, hedging itself by creating shares and ETF to back the proof of work network as well. So now BlackRock's revenue from the Bitcoin ETF has superseded the revenue from the S&P 500 fund. That's pretty remarkable. So the Bitcoin ETF for BlackRock became the most successful fund of all time in their ETF in terms of inflows. And now the fees that they've generated from it has superseded the largest ETF, which is the S&P 500, for those that want exposure to the top 500 companies in America, which is looking more like the Magnificent Seven with a bunch of zombie companies behind it as we transition to this world of Bitcoin AI and CBDCs. The most successful one, ironically, is Coinbase, that's gone into the S&P 500, and MicroStrategy, that's now got 600,000 Bitcoins approximately. In fact, let's look at the exact number. So BlackRock is now making more money out of the Bitcoin ETF, and you don't have to pay them. And you can own it in self-custody. But now Strategy, the most successful company in the S&P 500, maybe the only exception might be Nvidia. I'd need to look at the time frame because it's AI, Bitcoin, and then the traditional financial players that are going to be involved in stable coins and CBDCs. Understand why I'm guiding everybody to be prepared for this world. That's what's eating up the capital markets, the equity capital markets, and the debt capital markets. In fact, Strategy, leveraging the debt capital markets and the equity capital markets by issuing shares to bond and corporate bond investors, has now accumulated 597,325 Bitcoin. That means probably next week, by next week, or in the next couple of weeks, MicroStrategy would have passed, or Strategy is now called, 600,000 Bitcoin. What about BlackRock itself? Now, BlackRock ETF means that it's holding Bitcoin for you, which means that, it doesn't control the Bitcoin. It's proof of work. It's not like proof of stake, where if you own the coin, you get control over the network. It's not like a share where you get a vote over the network by owning the share. Bitcoin proof of work was resilient to this type of, BlackRock or institutions trying to own as much Bitcoin as possible. But there's only ever going to be 21 million Bitcoin. 20 million of them approximately have been mined. And now the BlackRock ETF holds 696,874 Bitcoin. At the last time I was doing this calculation, that is $74 billion for the spot Bitcoin ETF for BlackRock. And so MicroStrategy and BlackRock are kind of going head to head, but Strategy owns it on its own corporate balance sheet, while BlackRock is holding it for the ETF holders. But also, if you look at their mutual funds, they're putting more and more into their funds in order to protect themselves, because BlackRock, as we go through more in part 2 in macro and in part 3 in geopolitics, is hedging into this multipolar world while turning America into a surveillance technocracy and using warfare in order to reset the world order for the military industrial complex, so that the financial industrial complex can invest in the Build Back Better and loans and reconstruction projects as part of its portfolio. Now approximately 30% of the circulating Bitcoin is held by institutions that we know of. The first one is Satoshi Nakamoto. So Satoshi holds 1.1 million Bitcoin. Now, I personally believe, and one day I'll probably do, let me know in the comments section if you ever like me to do my opinion around who Satoshi is, how it was created, and various technologies certainly has open source libraries like SHA-256 that were created at the intelligence level. And I believe that there was a resistance. No one fully knows. But my personal belief in my research around who Satoshi is, I'm not going to mention it here. I might do a video on it one time. But I personally believe they're no longer with us, and those can't be moved. It doesn't matter if it ever is moved. It will impact price, certainly. But I shared a video, I think it was with somebody that's meant to be a big celebrity, financial guru. And he was saying, I think that Satoshi is spending their Bitcoin and investing in PR and marketing to pump the price while they sell it. Well, we know, if you don't know the way Bitcoin works, we can check everything on the blockchain. That's how we know that Satoshi has these 1.1 million, because they were the original Bitcoins that were mined and they've never moved. And I don't believe those keys can be moved. And various people like Craig Wright over time try to claim that it is theirs or various other things. And he's now in prison for lying and forging documents. But anyway, we know that Satoshi has about 1.1 million. We now know that Strategy has about 597 million, approaching 600,000. And we know from proof of reserve, so exchanges are able to prove their reserves by publishing wallets. And so the largest exchange, for example, Binance, and then some of the ETFs like BlackRock, and also the legacy Grayscale Bitcoin Trust, altogether they own approximately 1.2 million. And so on top of that, we also know that various governments, the largest one being America, but it owes about 100,000 of its Bitcoin to Bitfinex. I'm full disclosure a shareholder in Bitfinex alongside 100 other different companies in the sector. But they owe about 100,000. And if they repay what they're meant to pay to Bitfinex, then China would be the largest holder of Bitcoin. Then it would be America. America is trying to build its strategic reserves through Cynthia Lummis' bill. We'll cover a bit of an update on that in the final section of this. And then you go further down. These were all held through confiscations, like the UK. Germany sold off its entire supply. And then you have Ukraine and various other countries that have disclosed it. But we know that countries like, for example, Iran have been engaging in Bitcoin mining, and there was a big correction in the hash power that I covered in the last couple of weeks. And I'm pretty sure that, well, I know through sources that you've got the Kingdom of Bhutan has published their wallet address. Then you have El Salvador, which is buying a Bitcoin every day. And then they haven't announced it, but many countries like Saudi Arabia and UAE have been mining Bitcoin and purchasing Bitcoin. And will be, but they don't necessarily announce it. But of the announced Bitcoin, we know that there's about 850,000 Bitcoin held by government. So we have approximately 30% of Bitcoin held by those institutions that we know. 70% of the approximate, and most of the Bitcoin has been mined, there's only another 1 million left to mine, is held in self-custody or by people that we don't know who they are as well. And so the vast majority of the network is still held in self-custody. And that is the way that we should try to continue that for as long as possible. Not that it necessarily matters, but it's a matrix that we should check, because the Bitcoin custody to self-custody rate is the number of people, or at least the number of Bitcoin value that is owned by people that are going to be sovereign in the future, no matter what the government does, no matter what the bank does, no matter what the leverage ratio is, no matter what these Bitcoin treasury companies do. But that will grow over time as more and more people end up with TradFi tricking them into owning their Bitcoin with them, integrating it with the bank rails as well. And so, as I said, the self-custody side, it makes no difference. But I want my BitcoinHardTalk users to make sure that they're hedging themselves from these custodians as well. They definitely want to own it for you instead of you being free and owning it for yourself. They want your Bitcoin, and they will be using it as collateral in order to offer you loans and all sorts of proof of weapons network products as we usher in these different stablecoin models and various other things. So speaking of public companies, some of the companies that I invested in a long, long time ago, like Robinhood, they had a big conference. They're now a public company. And they listed a suite of other type of crypto and tokenization products. So they're going to be offering ETH staking, Solana staking. We focus on Bitcoin here. They're going to be offering perpetual futures, and they're also going to be doing tokenized US stocks in the European Union. They said that they're tokenizing OpenAI. Essentially what they're doing is they're buying the stock, and then the stock is being represented by a token. But because that token can't come off the exchange, it's a bit of a PR stunt. Where it becomes a bit of a difference is when these stocks are tokenized, and then you can take them off the exchange and then put them between exchanges, like from Robinhood to Coinbase to Kraken to a New York Stock Exchange to the DTCC itself. Then it starts to disintermediate. And we've been working on doing this ever since for a long time, but it's starting to get these large players that want to do that now. Now, remember, these centralized securities, which are very different to Bitcoin, and these stable coins, which are backed by debt, which are very different to Bitcoin, they're going to be ushering in programmable securities and programmable money, which is why we must take a deeper look at what the plan is with the Genius Act, which we've been covering, what the regulators are doing with the SEC side with tokenized securities, as well as what is in the big, beautiful bill. So we'll cover more about that in part 2. Everything's connected. When you start following the money, you get to predict the future because the monetary flows tell you the opposite of what the media. But anyway, Coinbase and custody. I invested in Coinbase a long time ago as private equity, but now as public, they are really heating up the competition. And the more competition, the more innovation that happens here. And now they're competing with the TradFi players. But interestingly, Coinbase has more customers than even a bank like HSBC, which has been around. I mean, it was created as a drug trafficking cartel network to get China addicted to opium. And then it was the bank that was pushing through all the flows of drug dealing that was later rolled up into the CIA and the networks that still push all the drugs today. And the reason that they invaded Afghanistan was to control the poppy seeds so that they could co-opt the Taliban, and then the CIA could work for them so that they can continue to distribute drugs into America. It's so funny how America starts to blame Canada and starts to blame Mexico and starts to blame China when it's actually the CIA. If America wants to deal with its problems, it needs to look inside at the CIA, because that's what these networks were created for. That's what the proof of the weapons network was created for. Human trafficking, drug trafficking, weapons trafficking, and creating war around the world in order to back the dollar through organizations like the IMF. And the system and the proof of weapons network that has now got competition, and the post-World War II Bretton Woods system is starting to enter into this multipolar world order, just as Bitcoin is creating the geopolitical and apolitically neutral mechanism for clearing globally, and being able to audit that globally and be able to transfer it infinitely. Anyway, other companies that are now public, Circle went public, as I said, Exodus went public. This was a self-custody wallet I invested in a long time ago. Circle now got into the stablecoin market. And so more and more options for those that have those legacy pensions that they want to get exposure to this world of Bitcoin AI, CBDCs, and stablecoins, so that you can essentially exit, outperform the system, and then convert that wealth into Bitcoin and self-custody as you make yourself more and more sovereign by understanding the networks and how these go. So speaking of the whole tokenized securities, now the Trump administration has installed a more crypto-friendly, tokenization-friendly. Why? Because that's what BlackRock wants to do. And obviously BlackRock, if you've watched any of my previous episodes, I believe was deeply involved in Operation Choke Point 2.0 through their installed plant, Gary Gensler, who was working with FTX and Sam Bankman-Fried, and also the investigation that should be done into the Federal Reserve and Jerome Powell's role. And based upon these, this proof of weapons network, they crashed the system to rebuild the system to trick you into owning your Bitcoin with them, so that then they can try and catch up and get as much Bitcoin from you as possible, because they're invested in this multipolar world. Once they got the Bitcoin ETF approved, Trump was installed. Trump reset the world order with his tariff policy, which I think was BlackRock's policy. And now we've got all these different capital flows moving, and we'll be covering more about that in the macro and geopolitical section. But now the new SEC chair is a crypto-friendly, securitization-friendly, because BlackRock wants to launch its new exchange based upon tokenization after invested in a company that I invested in many years ago called Securitize, that was building on top of some of these alternative blockchains like ETH. And now their Bitcoin ETF can start staking, so they can control more of the ETH network. And then they can do these tokenized securities. And they invested just before the IPO of Circle into, just before the Circle IPO into Circle. And that's why that is pumping as well. And then they install through the Trump administration a more crypto-friendly environment. And so Paul Atkins says, the chair SEC, tokenization is an innovation and the agency is committed to advancing it. So this is moving at a rapid pace. Now, is America getting caught behind in this whole thing? Because I've covered it many times, the World Liberty Financial Network that the Trump family set up with Steve Witkoff, the envoy for the Middle East, and the work that Cantor Fitzgerald and Howard Lutnick have been doing. I've been covering, how they've been getting themselves ultra rich with Bitcoin. I guess, I haven't got exact figures here, but I estimate the Trump administration, or the Trump family rather, have tripled their net worth through Bitcoin, preparing for this transition as they do deals in the Middle East, back it by their stable coins, get a higher yield that is then paying them more yield on the government debt so that they can buy more Bitcoin, invest more in Bitcoin mining, launch their Bitcoin ETFs and everything else the Trump family have been doing. America still doesn't have its Bitcoin, so it's meant to have a 200,000 strategic reserve. There was an executive order to audit it and find out where it is. And it will be found out that about 100,000 of it belongs to Bitcoin based upon a DOD and a DOJ, hack that happened via the crocodile of Wall Street and her partner in Ukraine. Basically, if those 100,000 are returned, then at the federal level, at the Treasury level, it still doesn't have enough Bitcoin to make any meaningful impact. So Senator Cynthia Lummis has been introducing essentially the bill, which is the Bitcoin Strategic Reserve bill, which allows in a tax neutral way, for example, America to revalue its gold, sell some of its gold, buy Bitcoin, and accumulate Bitcoin in a tax neutral way. It's not allowed to use big, beautiful bill money, for example, or money printing to buy Bitcoin, but it is allowed to do it in a tax neutral or tax way. And in the big, beautiful bill, there was nothing around this. And in fact, the things that Cynthia Lummis put in the big, beautiful bill were taken out. So Cynthia Lummis has now introduced a new bill, and the idea is to exempt tax on crypto for transactions under $300. What this means is that you could end up using Bitcoin, crypto, stable coins as a currency without incurring a taxable event. So one of the reasons that it's not been used as a currency is because imagine you buy some Bitcoin and then the price of that Bitcoin increases, and then you go buy a coffee with that Bitcoin. Well, you then have to calculate how much capital gains you made on that Bitcoin, and you have to report that and you have to pay some tax on it. And most people find that a hassle because currency is exempt when using it as a medium of exchange. And so this has held back in jurisdictions like America the use of crypto as a currency, even though you have things like Bitcoin debit cards that make it easy. And so the idea behind this bill is to exempt from capital gains transactions under $300, which would allow people to use it as a currency and do those deeper integrations with Bitcoin debit cards, so you can spend your Bitcoin in the Visa and MasterCard legacy network. And that will probably be deeply integrated with stablecoins, which obviously, because stablecoins don't move, they don't incur capital gains. So, whether this happens or not is still going to be interesting things. But anyway, it was taken out of the big, beautiful bill. So in the big, beautiful bill, the most pro-crypto, administration didn't do anything there. But we did have the Genius Act for stablecoins. Then it's going to be market structure next. Who regulates who? CFTC, SEC, OCC, all the different agencies. And then apparently at the end, there may be some Bitcoin strategic reserves for America. And in the meantime, everybody's front running. All of the different countries around the world are front running America, building their Bitcoin strategic reserves. The Middle East are building vast reserves by harnessing their energy. And we've got countries like El Salvador that are able to leapfrog, and the Kingdom of Bhutan that now 50% of its GDP is Bitcoin, based upon harnessing its water dams and using innovative energy infrastructure in order to harness Bitcoin. But anyway, nothing in the big, beautiful bill for Bitcoin and crypto. But so far, just as a recap, this isn't news, but in case you haven't been following along, 3 states in America allow Bitcoin reserves right now. New Hampshire, Arizona, and Texas. But interestingly, so far, Texas is actually utilizing it and will be buying $10 million worth of Bitcoin. That was announced. I'm not sure if the purchase has been made yet. I'm not sure if it's going to be done via an ETF. I'm not sure if they're going to publish the wallet address like El Salvador does. But anyway, apparently, the first state in America to accumulate Bitcoin has got the bill passed and has now purchased $10 million worth of Bitcoin as it supports the industry for using Bitcoin in order to do curtailment, make its energy grids more efficient, and use different forms of energy utilizing Bitcoin. And now it's putting Bitcoin on the state's balance sheet, which allows it to protect itself as the fiat currency proof of weapons network may end up in a decentralized 52 state network, and it could return to a state banking system, and this could be the collateral as it starts to potentially issue its own stable coins, whatever happens to the world as we enter into this world of Bitcoin AI and central bank digital currencies. Anyway, now, Polymarket, which we covered last week, got a $200 million investment from Founders Fund. Founders Fund is one of those proof of weapons network pundits, Peter Thiel, that got funding from Jeffrey Epstein, and is able to use military technology and is now behind Palantir, which is ushering in the surveillance state that we'll be covering in the macro section in part 2. But now he's invested in Polymarket, and people are speculating. And based upon speculations on the crypto bets that can happen on Polymarket, there is a 93% chance that the US national debt surpasses 38 trillion in 2025 alone. So it went up to 37 trillion. It's now betting that within 2025, it will be at $38 trillion, according to the crypto prediction platform Polymarket. And so based upon that, that's why there is a big rush. Is there going to be bit bonds? Is there going to be a transition? Is this why BlackRock got all of its clients into Bitcoin? And is this why this opportunity to front run as we enter into this multipolar world order, as America essentially gets turned into a technocracy, while the BlackRock can use its capital market as the host in order to usher in capital flows around the world? The director of digital assets, David Sachs, who is also part of the PayPal mafia and is also ushering in the AI, stablecoin, and crypto asset world, he said, we want as much Bitcoin as we can possibly accumulate. Now, we haven't seen that at the federal level yet. We haven't seen the Bitcoin Strategic Reserve happens yet, but is still giving those signals as everyone front runs as well. And so with that, Bitcoin is corrected a little bit right now, but it reclaims this week its $110,000 mark. The all-time high is approximately $112,000. So we are approaching new all-time highs as the proof of weapons network gets back to business as usual after the tariff policy reset the world order and ushered in this multipolar world. And so with that, we're going to be covering this week in macro in part 2 and the big, beautiful war and surveillance bill. Just before we do that, do me a favor. If you enjoyed this, then please, would you head over to YouTube if you're not watching this on YouTube? And we are about 500 subscribers away from 100,000. Once we hit 100,000, YouTube's going to do a review. And at the moment, everything's been organic. They shadow banned me once I started talking about subjects that they didn't want you to hear. Now we've moved into a bit more of a freedom of speech environment because they want the AI to start gobbling up what we're really saying when they build our social credit scores. But nonetheless, as we integrate into this system, once I get past 100,000, they can unshadow ban me, and hopefully I can get past this when they do a review. Just in case during that review things go wrong, follow me on X. I'm over 200,000 followers right now, and I go live on Spaces regularly. You can come up on the stage, ask me a question, and I give real-time updates on X all the time. Follow me over there. I also stream this over there in case it goes wrong on YouTube. In case that ever goes wrong, I also stream this on Rumble. I've got a very small following over there, trying to build it just in case. So please go and follow me over there, and you can watch it on Rumble. And then finally on the podcast, Apple Podcasts. This way you can download it and watch it bit by bit. If the whole episode is too long for you to watch it bit by bit, and you can have it on Spotify if you're an Android person as well. And then you can do it. You can listen to this while you're at the gym, break it into pieces, and do it with no extra time as well. Or you can be watching me live. And then finally, head over to simondixon.com. That's where I post all the new blogs. I just did another one on the Proof of Weapons Network. I'm going to play a little summary from that today in part 3. But if you go over there, you can join my newsletter. You get a login to a completely free Bitcoin Hard Talk membership portal where I back up everything. And you can get exclusive content that's only available over there just by creating a login for yourself completely free. So with that in mind, we're going to jump into part 2. And so do me a favor, help me get to that 100,000 subscribers. Share it, like it, retweet it, put a comment below. Share this with your family. I want more and more people protected for this transition to a world of Bitcoin, AI, and central bank digital currency. So give me a second to refresh my voice while you do that. 1, 2, 3. And we'll move into part 2 this week in macro. Welcome back to Bitcoin Hard Talk, episode 88. The one big, beautiful war and surveillance bill. In this week in macro, we're going to be covering the macro impacts now that this bill has passed. We knew it was going to pass despite the drama, and we'll go through some of the drama, what it means, what the macro impact is, and also the bit that most people are not talking about, which is the Patriot Act style surveillance that was put in there, and not enough people were debating debating it. Excuse my voice. I'm just going to get some water. Okay, let's jump straight in. So if you weren't following along, the US House has passed President Trump's one big, beautiful bill. And what is it? Well, it's essentially a $3.4 trillion legislative package that encompasses basically tax reforms, i.e., those that are entitled to certain programs. If you understand the US, the reason it has world reserve currency is because it exports debt globally called the dollar. The dollar is backed by debt. It runs a twin fiscal deficit, i.e., it spends more than it brings in, and it taxes. And it also runs a trade deficit, i.e., it imports more than it exports, which is what allows it to export all of that debt globally. And so what they're doing now, because the dollar is a debt-based Ponzi scheme, whether it's Bidenomics or Obamaonomics or Trumponomics, the debt has to increase. So all of the idiots that come out and say, we're going to pay down the national debt, they obviously don't understand that you'd have to simultaneously reform the debt-based Ponzi scheme and structurally change the dollar, which you could do with end the Fed bills like what Thomas Massey puts through. But otherwise, you need to increase the debt. And so Trump is not a fiscal conservative. In fact, he wants to print his way into out of this issue. And so when you have tax reforms, i.e. you reduce the amount of tax, you still increase the amount of money and the amount of debt, but you transfer the savings from the tax reform over to somebody else. So who is that somebody else? So while you implement tax reforms, and look, I'm not a fan of tax. It was implemented in 1913 in income tax to pay the debt on the Federal Reserve debt-based Ponzi scheme designed by the banksters in Jekyll Island. But you've promised a bunch of people stuff based upon them contributing to tax. Now you're taking away some of that, but you're not actually having like savings where people's disposable income increase, because you're increasing the money supply, which means that they pay more inflation, get less benefits, and the money still increases and goes somewhere else. So there is essentially tax reforms. So those that needed Medicare and various other things, if you understand the national debt is mainly war, interest on debt, Social Security, and Medicare, Medicaid, and these other different things as well. So if you can't cut on one of those, then you're not really doing anything else. And so we had this whole farce of the Department of Government Efficiency. And all the Department of Government Efficiency did in the end was save a few $1 billion, which is a speck, but consolidate all of the data into the Department of Government Efficiency, integrate it with artificial intelligence. And now that's being integrated into the one big beautiful bill, into the next building blocks of the surveillance state. And I'll be going through a little bit more around that. And the beta test that happened in the UK, that happened in Gaza, that happened in Ukraine, and is now coming to America, because it was slipped in to the one big beautiful bill. It also allows for significant investments in defense. Now, nobody is attacking America. The only people that attack America are from within its borders, and the fact that you can pay politicians to have open border policy and then do mass deportation so that ICE can profit from the private prison sentence that is building a global network around the world, like in El Salvador, and mass deportations, which gets you a subsidy from the government. You pay the inflation, they get to profit, and you have these privatized militias and military, which are being able to, beta test controlling the American people, because they know when you create this much wealth inequality, you create civil war. And when the proof of weapons network starts creating these global wars, which are not defense, covert regime changes, all the other things, you get external wars. And while no one would ever be crazy enough to actually, wage war on America, you end up getting all of this crony capitalism where the money's printed, and then you can benefit from all of this war, and then you can benefit from the rebuild, and you can benefit from all the contracts, and you can benefit financially from all the civil unrest and everything that happens. It is literally asset stripping the Americans and the world based upon this proof of weapons network, which is a layer that sits above government. In part 3, I'll do a reminder and a recap of exactly how it works. And so basically all that money printed, or a significant chunk of it, goes to the companies that profit from war. The Lockheed Martins, the General Dynamics, the Boeings, the Raytheons, and the Lockheed Martins. It also has a big budget for immigration enforcement, which is the bill. This is why the multi-uni-party proof of weapons network installed Biden to do open border policy, then installed Trump in order to do mass deportations that would usher in civil unrest so that they could push out media and propaganda to get you to opt in through one big beautiful bill that the invasion means that you need to protect your borders, which you may ideologically completely agree with. And based upon pushing out, through the media networks, making everything look really, really bad and creating the environment, you usher in surveillance. And the civil unrest leads to arrests, Guantanamo Bays, new bills where they say you're anti-Semitic if you are protesting for Palestine. And then suddenly you have boycott, divestments, BDS types of removals, and these different things that essentially completely destroys your First Amendment, your Constitution. And if you use your Second Amendment, as I've covered in many episodes, then that becomes the justification for the surveillance that's needed. So initially, just like 9/11, they say, well, we're going to take out the terrorists. And then you end up with Patriot Act, where you end up in Guantanamo Bay and various other things. The same thing is happening here. Open borders, mass deportations, anger around an invasion, which is mainly all the sanctions and all the wars that are created by the proof of weapons network as well. And then those sanctioned countries like Venezuela, they can't use their oil. So you end up with a government subject to a covert regime change. And all the violence and all the covert regime changes that are engineered, then they end up wanting to come in through the open borders. Then you fund those groups like M23 in Congo that then happen to M13 in El Salvador. And then they come through the borders. And then you have your other networks like ISIS and Al-Qaeda that the proof of weapons network funds. And then you usher in this surveillance state And guess who the contractor is that's going to get the benefit from that? Is in the big, beautiful bill. Palantir and all the different contracts that come from that. It also consolidates all of the data, like IRS data, healthcare data, into a private organization that consolidates the Doge data into Palantir that you're paying in order to say, yeah, they're going to protect the border, but actually it's going to implode and be used upon you because they know that civil unrest and the American people are the real problem they're trying to protect itself from as well. So it's to accommodate, basically, the big, beautiful bill is to accommodate the crony capitalism of the big spending that the politicians pay these lobby groups. And the bill basically raises the statutory debt ceiling to $5 trillion. What is that? That's where every time you need to review the debt ceiling, so now you can take on another $5 trillion, go beyond $40 trillion of debt. The financial industrial complex get to buy all those bonds, so they get to receive the yield. The stablecoin issues in the technocracy get to receive that yield and buy Bitcoin. That creates inflation for those that don't own assets. That creates more civil unrest, which creates the environment in order to usher in the surveillance state and all the law changes that take away your rights and freedom. This model was beta tested in the UK. We saw this happen through Palantir contracts, open border policy, propaganda in order to perpetuate, horrific things and all sorts of, like we saw it. We beta tested this coming to America. And this was the same thing that they learned how to do in the Middle East, in Asia, in Latin America. But anyway, you've now got an additional $5 trillion. When that $5 trillion ceiling, it doesn't mean that you limit the debt. It means that you renegotiate so that all the lobbyists that paid for all the Congress people to be politicians in the first place, you get to reset and make sure that they're following your policy rather than the people's policy. And this is how the proof of weapons network built its power of this stateless entity that is able to control the political systems and use the investment banks in order to vassalize all the organizations into securities so that the asset managers that are managing your money get board seats and share control so that they can then use artificial intelligence and technology in order to reshape capital markets that the Federal Reserve uses in monetary policy, the Treasury uses in this fiscal policy, and all the asset managers use. And so you have this stateless, unaccountable entity that is able to even use intelligence networks to create wars and profit from it as well. So anyway, this big, beautiful bill ushers in approximately $3.3 trillion. It adds $3.3 trillion to the deficit. And this is the administration that said they're going to be doing Make America Great Again by ushering in controlling the deficit and using tariffs in order to do that so they can rebuild the manufacturing base in America. All gone. And that's why we had a bit of a farce. Now, I'm not 100% sure on whether Elon is a wild card. He's somewhat unpredictable, or whether this is some kind of scripted type of breakup. Because he now gets to break up and focus on the technology he was given by NASA and the military industrial complex. And he can now create his social credit score by integrating Grok into X and preventing freedom of reach, but giving freedom of speech, various other things. But Elon has basically said, if this bill gets through, he's going to back Thomas Massie, who had the End Fed bill, who exposed AIPAC and the Congress members are paid by the Israeli lobby, even though there's much bigger lobbies like military lobby and banking lobby and big pharma lobby. But in order to create this environment, and remember, if you didn't watch last week, I answered the question around the Israel-America relationship, who controls who, and why that breakup is happening, and why they're using plausible deniability in order to make sure that these are separated. You can watch last week's episode if you missed that. But essentially, Elon said he'll create a new party, and if this bill passes, he'll back Thomas Massie in the 2028 campaign. Now, look, I support this, but we know, and I'll be covering it more in part 3, that if you want an influence on politics, it's not the politicians. You either need to be rich and use lobby, or you need to recognize that corporates control politics. And so therefore it's only your money that determines whether they listen to you or not. If you can impact their share price, and by impacting share price, you can get overthrow of board members and then less money for lobby, then through boycotting and various other measures, that's how you really impact share price. That's how you engage in the political process. It's your money that gets political, process. Everything else is just a farce. And we know that the third party will be controlled by the lobbies. And then we'll have this narrative thinking, all right, so the Democrats are corrupt under Biden. And then once they realize everything that's Trump's done, oh, so Trump is completely corrupt and how much money he made and he didn't deliver upon any of his promises. We better get Elon and Thomas Massie in, who are the real deal. They got the end the Fed bill, and it's just part of the same system. Unless you actually get that end the Fed bill, but that hope and promise of finally a politician doing something means you get a third round of the merry-go-round of distraction, and you end up distracted thinking this time it's all going to change. All we need to do is get this person in and this party in, and you go through the same merry-go-round of distraction of achieving nothing and ending up not understanding that the real battle was the corporations that control your government and follow the money, and you can understand how to have real impact. Anyway, Trump came out and said, quote unquote, quote here, "It is obvious with the insane spending of this bill, which increases the debt ceiling by a record $5 trillion in capital like Trump, that we live in a one-party country, the Porky Pig Party," which is true. It is a recognition that the system is just to send money to the corporations. Time for a new political party that actually cares about the people. And guess what? They won't care about the people, because unless you reform the money, you have to increase the debt. Elon, you either know or you don't know. And my guess is because you built PayPal and because you got Bitcoin on Tesla's balance sheet and because you own a bunch of Bitcoin, you know. So that draws me to the conclusion that you can't trust him, because the PayPal mafia knows that it's a debt-based Ponzi scheme. And if you ever reduce the debt, then you shrink the dollars. When you shrink the dollar, you create a depression, you destroy the proof of weapons network. When you destroy the proof of weapons network, you end up in a debt spiral downwards, a deflationary cycle, money into other currencies, the unwinding of the IMF system, and you end up resetting the world order, which is what BlackRock wants. And you are one of those high net worth individuals that is a part of the proof of weapons network as well. So this is just a mechanism for making the people believe that something's going to change. And I like Thomas Massie. I'm not sure, whether he's in on this or genuinely believes he can make the change. He follows me on X. He's saying all the right stuff, doing all the right stuff. But let's see. I guess it gives that third attempt at thinking that Americans can change the system. But anyway, Massie, he did what he said he was going to do. He voted against the big, beautiful bill, but it wasn't enough to not get it happen. Right. So what happens? What is the side effects? So that's what the big, beautiful bill is. Essentially, it has more control to the corporations that control the deep state, control the government, and ushers in a surveillance state. So what is happening in the real world? Well, we had some figures this week in the macro side. So unemployment came in at 4.1%. You want that number to be low. So that is a good number, because the expected unemployment number by the market was 4.3%. So it is 0.2% better. Jobs are good. That is a good number. That is a considered a good thing. So it's not stagflation where you have decreasing unemployment through AI. You have increasing inflation and you have decreased growth based upon a recession or anything. We're not there yet, because that's why they needed this stimulus package. Because they want to stimulate through returning inflation, fudging numbers, changing the index. And where are those jobs coming? Well, the largest contributor to the increase in employment came from the government. So the government was the highest contributor to those jobs. So America is becoming a crony capitalist, debt-based Ponzi scheme, technocracy bailed out by stable coins that are ushering in employment through government, an ever-increasing government, and a part of the system that is becoming more and more socialist as it creates the surveillance technology in order to usher in a universal basic income backed by stable coins as you engage in a destabilization campaign and civil unrest as the world transitions to Bitcoin, AI, and CBDCs, and the rich are protecting themselves with Bitcoin and issuing stable coins so that they can get the last bit of debt and buy as much Bitcoin as possible as capital outflows, and they invest in a multipolar world rather than and leaving America to just be the host nation for the technocracy with the large capital markets to extract as much as possible, just like what happened to Britain, Europe, and is currently actually happening to Israel as well. As we covered, we'll be covering more in part 3 as well. So it is essentially, the big beautiful bill is a government job stimulus. It will lead to more jobs as AI takes more jobs. Those jobs will build the infrastructure to be able to build on robotics and artificial intelligence. And the big beautiful bill is just a revenue stimulus so that you can print more fake GDP. So you can say you're not a recession as the government takes up more and more of the revenue, and you can repackage that GDP into the profits of Lockheed Martin, General Dynamic, BlackRock, and all of these other institutions that receive the money and Palantir to make it look like, hey, as we get all this inflation, at least we're growing and becoming more productive. Because if you can make it look like you're growing and the debt is increasing at a slower rate than the amount you're taking on, which it certainly isn't right now, you can pretend that you are okay to take on this debt and you can grow your way out of it. There is a problem with this, though. The problem is that if employment is good and the fake GDP makes the economy look good, and inflation is getting better because of these deflationary impacts and the impact of keeping those rates high, there's no justification to cut the rates at the Federal Reserve level. And that is what Trump needs in order to roll over the debt. Last week, we covered how to roll over $10 trillion of debt. So unless you get a return to inflation, then how are you going to justify cutting the debt? And the debt is $10 trillion that needs to be rolled over this year. And Trump wants to do it based upon short-term debt. So he wants to do what Janet Yellen did. And he wants to install his person at the Fed that will do that, because Jerome Powell's not doing it, whether that's a theater, because they both work for the same financial industrial complex. The Fed chairman is just a puppet for the bank's policy, because the banks are the shareholders of the Fed. And he's just the front man that needs to go into Congress saying all the reasons why he's doing stuff. But Trump wants to roll over the short-term debt because the short-term debt has the lowest interest rate, and there is a problem. As you make the economy worse and worse and worse, the bit that the Federal Reserve doesn't control, which is the price that BlackRock and everybody in the long-term markets and the mortgage producers and Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac and all the financial industrial complex, the credit card issues, the auto loan issuers, all of those securitized financial products that JP Morgan, Citibank all issue, their rate is going up, the 10-year treasury and the 30-year treasury. And no matter what the Fed does, that's still broken away. So the lower you put the rate, the higher the interest rate is going, because America's becoming more and more of a distressed asset to roll over. And so you have the long-term rate getting higher, the short-term rate on the 1 month, 3 week, 3 month treasuries, if you could force it lower, but you don't have the justification for that because you don't have the return to inflation and the economy is strong. And that is the dilemma that we are witnessing as we have this rollover of the $10 trillion of debt. And that is the dilemma. And that is why we're hitting distressed distressed debt service, but they're still rolling it all over in order to try and pump the stock market so that the wealth inequality gets greater between those that own those shares and those that doesn't have the shares, which is the stimulus package. Now, the proof of weapons network also needs, because I'll talk more in part 3 as a recap. I said by following their balance sheets, you can see that there's a new vision for the Middle East, but you need to make up, the military industrial complex needs to make up for those profits. And so there is a big EU war stimulus so that the Europeans and the Brits can print more money. Now they got their lower interest rates, roll over their debt, and they can spend it into, as a vassal of the proof of weapons network, they can spend it into BlackRock's portfolio companies hosted in America, like Lockheed Martin and General Dynamics. So if you can keep pushing the war machine in Europe, then there's another $1 trillion of revenue to be made of fake GDP for America, so it can pretend that it's not in a recession, so it can roll over further in this proof of weapons network. And now BlackRock has securitized, and essentially Zelensky is a pundit of the proof of weapons network. He's now securitized the IMF debt in order to give BlackRock access to 60% of the land. The rest of it will go in rare earth mineral deals to American corporations, and the rest will go to Russia to control their part of their land. And BlackRock will securitize the rest. Then you can print some more GDP growth, and the proof of weapons network can roll over a little bit further as it prepares for civil unrest. So I covered last week that in the NATO summit, all of the European Union, they're essentially doubling their war spending to 5%. So Trump said, you got to double your war spending, because NATO is just a sales strategy for the military industrial complex and these fake GDP prints based upon the euro dollar system as well. So now that the tariff policies have had their desired impact of ushering in the multipolar world, we start to come to the end of the 90-day deadline. And now we need all of these deals being done that return it back to the stimulus package, which is the big, beautiful bill. So as a result of the big, beautiful bill, the S&P reached new all-time highs based upon the government stimulus and the recognition that it's actually happening. As people were rumoring whether it was going to happen or not, the market would have corrected. The market didn't correct, so we knew it was going to come through. Because it's a debt-based Ponzi scheme stimulus. It's a war machine stimulus. That's what the big, beautiful bill is from the guy that said, I don't do wars. It's a proof of weapons network stimulus. And that's how you know that all politicians are controlled, and this one is no difference. If you do not own tech, war stocks, banks, and any stocks in general, then those are the people that are going to suffer. Who owns all of that? Concentration of wealth, because almost all of those stocks are held by the highest wealthy around the world, in fact, as well. So if you're, if you don't care about the boycotts, then you can protect yourself by doing what they're doing, owning those stocks. But if you want to boycott the system as I do, then you can just simply exit and opt out. And the way that you've got essentially a war machine stimulus, a surveillance stimulus, and you also have a debt stimulus. The way you protect yourself from a debt stimulus is by owning fixed money supply. Fixed money supply, the two assets are Bitcoin and gold, Bitcoin in the digital, gold in the physical. Otherwise, you suffer. So therefore, you can opt out of the system by owning Bitcoin. You can boycott the Federal Reserve System, and you can have the impact and beat the system historically as well. So Trump essentially campaigned against Biden, his reckless deficit spending, and basically the resulting inflation that Biden allegedly helped to produce, which he did because they're all prostitutes for the proof of weapons network. They work for the lobbies. There is no autonomy there. It's all a farce. And so Biden, that was what the Trump administration said. And so now that Trump got himself in power by saying that and saying he'll protect on borders as the justification for the narrative that's needed for the surveillance state, the same Trump deficit spending will be even more. And that will lead to even more inflation. And if you essentially thought that Biden economics were bad, wait until you get Trumponomics. Because it's the same thing. It's the same flavor. He might get bailed out by the deflationary impact of artificial intelligence, but that will take the jobs. And those jobs then lead to demand destruction because you have to usher in the stable coin universal basic income from those that are losing their job. And so this is what the debt-based Ponzi scheme takes you to. This is the final years of rollover, and you need to adjust yourself for it. All of the macro indicators are telling us that. Now, why is it that he wants to roll over on short-term debt? Because it's easier to use short-term debt as collateral. So if you have a 1-month treasury bill, you can use that as collateral in order to borrow more. If you've got a 30-year bond or a 10-year bond, you can't use that as collateral because people are like, have you seen America's debt? What is 10-year or 30-year or 20-year going to look like? I got no idea. So the demand for those are a lot lower because the short-term debt means you can use it as collateral and re-leverage further. So Trump wants to do what Liz Truss did. Do you remember Liz Truss? She came along and she used BlackRock's product in order to over-leverage and take the American pension system and use BlackRock's product to create dividend and use it as collateral on the short-term debt. And when she tried to do something crazy, like, offer subsidies between the British people that were choosing between eating and heating because the price of oil and gas was going through the roof, at the same time as saying we're going to do cutbacks in tax, it broke the whole system. And she was fired by the Bank of England Proof of Weapons Network because essentially it broke. And then they were able to get the BlackRock financial products in. But it is exactly the Trump strategy, leveraging short-term debt and using the BlackRock strategy in order to lever up and get more and more leverage and more rollover so that the BlackRock portfolios benefit from that. This is essentially what Starmer in the UK has continued to do in the UK. Starmer basically sent billions and billions of dollars that was printed from the Bank of England to the Proof of Weapons Network. He got to do some of it to the military industrial complex in the UK, like BAE Systems, for the Israeli side. But he got to do the most of it for Ukraine by essentially sending money over to Zelensky. Zelensky then would buy it in the America. The Bank of England would print the money. And you have USAID, which is the organization that was controlling both the BBC and the Ukrainian media in order to spread propaganda to make people think like we were defending democracy when this was a NATO war via the Proof of Weapons Network that escalated through NATO in Ukraine in order to agitate a war with Russia. Russia, a military equivalent that has more nuclear weapons than America, so that it could destabilize Europe, vassalize it into a BlackRock colony further and further and further, so that now BlackRock can use the European Union, the UK, now I believe it's doing the same with Israel and America, and it can now use that in order to essentially print more money, create destabilization campaigns, and beta test its surveillance technology. Interestingly, there was some evidence this week. 100 BBC journalists came out and they were complaining about being forced to give pro-Israeli propaganda. And there was a campaign. They left the BBC. 100 journalists said, we were being forced and told what to say. So we know who controls the media. We know how this gets funded via these NGOs. And we know that the BBC is a tool for the Proof of Weapons Network. And this was exactly the same as what happened in Ukraine in order to get people to want to believe that they're fighting for their sovereign and they're fighting for their country in a war they just can't win. And now Zelensky is recruiting 18-year-olds, taking them off the street because they're persuading through this media for the Ukraine to fight to the last Ukrainian. Like, this is how the proof of weapons network works. And what is Ukraine doing? They were borrowing from the IMF. The IMF was using that as collateral through these BlackRock financial products that basically allowed BlackRock to end up with all the wheat fields and all of the 60% of the land that it now essentially has control over through collateral, which it can then use for the whole Build Back Better campaign, as its portfolio companies will benefit from the rebuild, as the military industrial complex benefits from it, and the financial industrial complex issues all the loan and receives all of the interest on that. So that's the model. And you think our governments are in control? You think MAGA is about the American people? I saw what happened in Europe and UK, and it has come into America, and it's even happening in Israel right now, because Israel is no longer a strategic asset to the proof of weapons network, because its brand has been destroyed. It has been exposed, thanks to the resistance against it, social media as well. And of course, they get all their rare earth minerals and all the components that the proof of weapons network needed for their artificial intelligence and robotics economy that it's being invested in. So Americans, Europeans, and Brits pay the bill, and they create the inflation. The inflation leaves you choosing between eating and heating if you haven't invested in the assets that benefit from the proof of weapons network. And the inflation is exported globally through the Bank of International Settlements. And then when there is civil unrest, Palantir obtains the contract. So who did Palantir beta test? Well, it got contracts with the UK Department of Defense. It got contracts with the UK National Health Service. It got contracts with the UK border control systems. And we saw that it installed people like Tommy Robinson to create civil unrest, who was employed through Mossad in order to usher in this national movement against a Muslim invasion, which is a beta test for the exact thing that is happening in US right now. So the UK was the complete beta test for the civil unrest campaign that leads to more contracts with Palantir and the BlackRock proof of weapons network vassalizing the country, so you just become a tool for the corporate interests that sit on the top and control the government. And Palantir was the same technology that beta tested genocide as a service in Gaza. I said to you, if you allow it, it's coming to you. And they also beta tested occupation as a service in West Bank. And I said that if you allow for this, this is coming to you. And they also beta tested in Saudi Arabia during Hajj crowd control in order to make sure that every aspect of how you control people, that was beta tested there. And now, thanks to the US big, beautiful bill, the beta test is coming to America and is being used upon the American people, because the whole collective West and that fake democracy in Israel is being vassalized into the proof of weapons network. And you fell for it because you listened to the media. But obviously, if you were listening to Bitcoin Hard Talk, you were protected all along and you watched it. And you've been stacking your Bitcoin, protecting yourself, and beating the proof of weapons network and boycotting through peaceful proof of work. So in America, the destabilization campaign continues. In the past 24 hours, what have we seen? We've seen Trump, who was the agent of destabilization, basically, he threatened Elon Musk to pave way for the next narrative of, we can take back our country. He was also coming after Thomas Massie, who didn't vote for the big, beautiful bill. He also came after Japan. Who's Japan? The largest foreign purchaser of US treasuries that is not going to engage in, that is now reset and is moving further towards BRICS, because the tariff policy meant that it started using its fiscal and monetary policy for its own people, rather than the Bank of Japan being a vassal bank for speculators and hedge funds. And so it is leading to the breakup of that relationship, again, strategically weakening the dollar, removing the soft power so that we can usher in this multipolar world, which is the BlackRock strategy. It even came after a judge in Israel, a judge in Israel, because he is part of the exit strategy for Netanyahu that we'll cover in part 3. basically, Washington has paid for 70% of Israel's military costs, basically since October the 7th, 2023. That's why it needs more stimulus as well, because it needed to beta test through the Palestinian lab the technology that it wants to use as its surveillance state as well in America. And so the big beautiful bill essentially, so it came after Israeli judges in order to, because the judge was coming up, the judicial system, which Netanyahu tried to overthrow, that was leading to protests before the operation of October the 7th, which was allowed to happen. And then the Hannibal Directive was implemented, where Israel killed its own people and then created atrocity propaganda. Go to my blog, Atrocity Inc., to make up mass sexual violence and mass killings that it said was, which some of those did happen, but that was an operation which led to the destruction and the beta test of all the technology. So at the same time, grants have been awarded, essentially 7.4 million, basically students that were awarded grants during 2025 and 2026. They're going to be 23% of them is going to be cut down to $5,700 per year. Now, remember, I want smaller government. That's my ideology. I like hard money, and I like government to be not used as crony capitalism. But this is still crony capitalism. This is increasing $3.3 trillion on the budget deficit, $5 trillion on the debt ceiling, $1.3 trillion stimulus to crony capitalism. So if even the people, the American people, the students that are taking on all the debt, they get cut, and it's not a saving at all. It's still going over to the large multinational corporations. So how much of that is actually going over to Israel as well? Well, $17.9 billion in direct aid, which is approximately $4.86 billion in Pentagon regional operations, has already been sent through under Trump and the Biden side. $20.3 billion in defense arms deals. Remember, that gets spent back in America to create fake GDP to prop up the proof of weapons network so that you get more inflation and you pay the bill. Billions more in shipping losses as a result of this. Stockpile transfers that needed to go around different areas. Corporate handouts, lashed out. Basically, that all gets redirected. So in the end, in order to save Netanyahu and make him look like a hero, Trump lashes out and said, "Oh, hey, he's a hero." While all of the people around in America are protesting against those actions. Trump decided in his destabilization campaign to lash out at the CEO of AT&T, just say, forget putting the tariff price up. That's your fault. He also came out at Jerome Powell in order to create this whole destabilization campaign between the Federal Reserve and Treasury. At the same time, the U.S. housing regulator basically called upon Congress to investigate the Fed chair, Jerome Powell. And so you're getting the fabrics of soft power all leading to capital outflows, but only investing in the Magnificent Seven, the artificial intelligence, the robotics infrastructure, the energy based upon controlling, I believe, through BlackRock strategy via its control of its puppet government, the Trump administration, to usher this in as well. As I said right from the beginning, Liberation Day was to liberate the world from the dollar through a multipolar world order. Then it would return back to its business as usual because the debt can never be repaid and the banks would never allow its subsidy from the debt to go. So in this continued destabilization campaign, we're coming to the end of this 90-day, which is meant to be 10% tariffs everywhere. And so Trump also came after Canada. Trump ended basically its trade talks with Canada. Canada is basically removed its what is called its digital service tax, which was meant to be on America in order to try and regain conversations. Now, remember, Canada and Mexico are the US largest trading partners and at their border. And so Canada is a much bigger partner than China. So, although it is 100% dependent upon China, as I've always said, for some of its imports, it is now coming after its biggest trading partners. It's nothing more than a destabilization campaign as well. It also, in the last 48 hours, he started lashing out on Truth Social on Thorn Tills, a Forbes reporter. He also came after Harvard University. He also came out after migrants, legal migrants, who he said are being eaten by Burmese pythons in the Everglades, while at the same time releasing a new line of colognes and a new brand of telephones. And so you're getting these new products that are coming out. As I said, the Trump administration is really, really cashing in on this destabilization campaign. And so what are we waiting for next? So today is a holiday in America. And next week is the end of the 90-day extension by which Trump said we'll have the deal done and we'll have all our negotiations said. So Trump said that he will not extend the 90-day deadline, which ends next week on July the 9th. And instead, the US will make essentially a trade. He basically said, I doubt the US will make a trade deal with Japan. Japan, the largest purchaser of US treasuries while they're trying to roll over $10 trillion. And the Bank of Japan, which would allow for the free money for the hedge funds to collateralize and purchase some of those treasuries as well. So Trump said that he was going to start sending letters to countries by next Friday. And that is, the letters are going to notify to all of the different countries basically what their tariff rate is. And there's going to be no more negotiations, he's saying. And so those letters are going to be sent out, and we'll see what happens in this destabilization campaigns. He also added that they would have to start paying the duties by the 1st of August. So the money is meant to be coming in by the 1st of August, which is when the prices will go up based upon all the businesses that are import and are dependent upon that. If it happens, the market's not quite taking it seriously. So that creates more volatility opportunities for the hedge funds and those that are managing the currency risks for the countries. That's the next step. So we find out on the first. He always creates lots of good content for me to cover in the macro section. The end result is America's not a reliable partner. So invest in the multipolar world order, and that is BlackRock strategy, as I said. What else have we got? Basically, the net result of all of this is it transfers power. It is way from Main Street over to Wall Street that's constructing the deals. The small businesses get gobbled up into the large businesses, and the large multinational corporations end up benefiting from this, and they're able to offset any of the tax through their multinational structure. So that's the net impact. Now, remember, when you cut taxes through debt financing, essentially what you're doing is you're cutting taxes, increasing the debt, then this is the classic playbook, how you benefit the proof of weapons network. You're essentially enriching the 1% and burdening the future generations with more debt. That's the classic playbook. And that's exactly what the Big Beautiful Bill will do. And that will be impacted, and people will get to see that as well. But it's not Trump. Trump is a puppet for the corporations that are vassalizing all of the different states, because the banks are able to securitize everything and the owners of those assets get to control. And if you don't manage your money by investing in Bitcoin and keeping it simple, you hand it over to BlackRock. BlackRock becomes more powerful, and then BlackRock is able to exert more control as the banks essentially print the money. Then they get to buy the bonds. They get this head start in Genius Act to offer the yield on those stable coins. And now the stablecoin issuers essentially benefit from any runaway or higher rates. But they don't benefit if the rates come down. So there's a bit of a conflict in strategy, but the longer term rates go up, which is the truth. So Big Beautiful Bill is a complete wealth transfer on its US citizens based upon having a debt-based Ponzi scheme. Until you reform money, no tax reform will prevent any of that as well, which is why Musk must understand that. And Musk is probably an agent for making Americans think next time will be different. It might as well, this whole policy, just like it was written for the UK, the destabilization campaign, Palantir, civil unrest, all that stuff, this might as well have been written by BlackRock because it's using the UK model and it's the exact same thing. So US Treasury Besant, he came out this week and he said, why would we borrow longer, longer term at these rates? So he's confirming the strategy is roll over at shorter term rates. Why would we borrow longer? Because it's pushing up the long-term rates, justifying while you roll over on the short-term debt, creating a real constant mortgage scenario, and then trying to get the Federal Reserve to cut them while the longer-term rates go as that strategy. So as part of the destabilization campaign as well, the US is actively calling for massive interest rate cuts. And he even said they should be about 1%. That's like a 3 basis point correction. And he is actively pushing out the narrative and everything he needs to say in order to replace the Fed Chair Powell with somebody who will basically immediately cut rates to unprecedented levels. Meanwhile, stocks are at all-time high. This is a stimulus for the wealthy. Real estate prices, they're based upon the longer-term debt, the 10-year and 20-year. So this is really a particularly commercial real estate, which is the backbone of some of the banking system, which then leads to socialized losses, privatized gains, a return to quantitative easing eventually. And then the Federal Reserve can reset the order and basically have the whole government at its knees, which it does, if it can return to, controlling some of the shorter term rates as well. The US debt reaches its all-time high, and accordingly, crypto is also starting to reach its all-time high. But Bitcoin is a two-way trade. It benefits from the debt-based Ponzi scheme, but it is a solution as the debt-based Ponzi scheme unfolds. And that is the beauty of Bitcoin. And that is why own more Bitcoin each month than the previous month. You get to boycott the system. You get to become sovereign. Historically, you beat in every single asset class. And you can simplify your life so you don't need BlackRock to manage it for you. There's basically never been a time in history where the Fed cut rate would come back to 1% from here. And this would probably pump stock prices and create a real crazy cycle around the mortgage markets and what that would do to banks and just enter into massive uncertainty. So when is Fed Chair Powell coming out? Well, he is due to leave in May 2026. And that is when he officially steps down at the end. And maybe after that or before that or whatever happens, Trump, if we are to believe him, which we don't believe a damn thing, he'll install his own person and then be cutting rates to 1%, which would be a massively inflationary move and a return to inflation as that all rolls out throughout the Trump administration. It would send the long-term borrowing rates through the roof. And that would impact the real estate market, credit markets, auto loan markets, student loan markets, and just turn America into an emerging market, distressed debt to make the rich get richer. And now you've, at least with the big, beautiful bill, got your control surveillance state. And meanwhile, what's happening in the rest of the world? Well, India basically unloaded all of its US sanctioned oil tankers, which it was sending to Iran during the Iran-Israel war. So the BRICS network is flowing perfectly as usual. Basically, they take the oil tankers, they change the name on them, and they basically, all of the tankers are using as oil, going as usual. So basically, sanctions no longer work. And that supports BRICS, which was the reason for BRICS. The number of oil, gas, and gas drilling that is happening in the US, it has now declined for a 9th consecutive week. So for 9 weeks, oil produced in America has declined. That is the longest streak since basically the COVID lockdown in 2020. And Trump's basically campaigned upon the old drill, baby, drill will support oil. Yet, he's given less drilling to America, or less drilling is happening than under Biden. And so all of the narratives is, this presidency isn't so far a drill, baby, drill. He wants to get the price of oil down. Oil down means less profits for the drill, baby, drill corporations, because he needs to control inflation. And the only way to do that is through deflationary impacts, decreasing the price of oil, and the losing jobs through artificial intelligence and robotics. And so at the same time as the number of oil barrels are decreasing for a 9th consecutive, which is eating into the strategic petroleum reserves eventually, it may anyway, as it starts to get there. Iranian oil exports to China reached a record of 1.83 million barrels a day between June the 1st and June the 20th. So throughout that whole time, the oil exports were carrying up and increasing. So we reached the end of the 90-day tariff war negotiations. We'll be covering it in future episodes. It's due to expire next week on the 9th of July. We'll see what happens. We're meant to get a China deal. Trump announced that in 2 weeks, we'll find out what's going to be happening with TikTok. Is that the Trump deal? Is that the China deal? Is that what it is going to be? We'll see. Anyway, more uncertainty, more destabilization. And in the meantime, what's been happening with the dollar? So the dollar measured by DXY, which is the dollar measured to a basket of currencies, the biggest one being the euros, throughout the big, beautiful bill, it's now fallen not just below 100, not just below 99, not just below 98, but now with the implementation of the big, beautiful bill, it's fallen below $97 as the stock market reaches new all-time high. This is essentially structured into the proof of weapons network. The proof of weapons network is issuing debt today in order to fund the crony capitalism that it benefits from. It's basically, it kicks the repayment to tomorrow, at which point it can hedge, and then it can benefit from the volatility in between. It's not a flaw. It's not some type of bug in the system. It's exactly how the Federal Reserve designed the system, and it's evolved into this proof of weapons network. And you need to protect yourself. That's why I encourage the protection for macro is to just own more Bitcoin this month than the previous month. It was designed to do the opposite through proof of work than the proof of weapons network. And this week as well, Texas governor, he came out and he signed a new law making gold and silver legal tender in the day-to-day financial transactions of the US. So if you want to protect yourself with gold, it probably ends up in custody. And so you need to solve the self-custody problem, which is easier to do in the digital world than the physical world. And that is everything I've got for this week in macro at Bitcoin Hard Talk, episode 88, the big, beautiful war and surveillance bill. I hope it covered the bits that maybe you didn't get covered anywhere else. But do me a favor, if you enjoyed that, we're going to be moving into part 3 this week in geopolitics. And we're going to do a quick recap. I talked about the proof of weapons network. We'll do a quick recap on what the proof of weapons network is, and then everything that's happened this week and how we know where it's going next in the geopolitical side so that you can get ahead of the macro. And then the Bitcoin side tends to lead these moves as well, and you can protect yourself. And also, I want to go through one big victory of showing that if you're getting despondent with the political process because you have no influence, how we can actually have an influence. I want to show a case study towards the end of a successful operation. So with that in mind, just before we move to part 3, what I'd love for you to do is head over to YouTube. We are very close to 100,000 subscribers. I think we've got 500 more to go. Hit the bell symbol, hit all, and subscribe to my YouTube channel. Once we get to 100,000 subscribers, we're going to get a review by YouTube, and I can make sure we get unshadow banned. But if they block me, head over to X and follow me there. We stream there, and I go live. You can ask me questions on X Spaces, and you can come up to the stage. If you don't follow me there and everything goes wrong, we'll go over to Rumble, which hopefully won't censor me. You can follow me there. I've got a small following that we're building just in case this channel gets taken out. Also, you can download on Apple podcasts, and you can also do the same on Spotify. Watch this bit by bit. Do it no extra time as you're running in the gym, as you're driving. You can download it and come back to it so you don't miss a thing. And finally, head over to simondixon.com, where you can get a free membership to the Bitcoin Hard Talk membership portal, where we back everything up on our own infrastructure so that no matter what happens, we've got it all. Okay, welcome back to Bitcoin Hard Talk, episode 88, part 3. We're going deep into the night. We got the last section on geopolitics, and I wanted to give a quick recap. Now, again, if you're watching part 3, in part 2, we covered this week in macro and everything that was happening, the big, beautiful bill and the surveillance state and the war machine that is being built up in the big, beautiful bill and the stimulus and the impacts and how you protect yourself. I also covered this week in Bitcoin and everything that's been happening on the Bitcoin side, an exact breakdown of who owns the Bitcoin, what the network's looking like, the difference between custody and self-custody. In part 3, I'm going to be giving you an update on the next step of the proof of weapons network, looking at the major wars, what came next, what I've been forecasting previously, and how we know that those that have been watching Bitcoin Hard Talk, nothing that happened this week would be a surprise to you because we called it in the previous weeks as well. Now, we don't know the exact flavor of how it's going to happen, but by following the money, we don't listen to the media and we don't listen to the politicians, and we get a much, much better tool for seeing what comes next, which can give us less stress and we can focus on how to protect ourselves. Okay, now let me give you a little bit of a recap on the proof of weapons network, because basically the geopolitics as I see it today, if you're new to the channel, I'll give a quick recap, but you can watch previous episodes if you want to go deeper into it. But the proof of weapons network, which is a stateless entity that sits above government and is mainly in control of Western governments, UK, US, EU, and also Israel. And it has different factions like the military industrial complex, the financial industrial complex, the technology complex, the different areas of pharma and consumption and various other things. I believe that right now, the current geopolitical environment is that the proof of weapons network is negotiating a military industrial complex exit from the Middle East and using all of its leverage in order to utilize Israel that's about to be vassalized into the Gulf Cooperation Council, GCC countries, because the military is going to exit and we're going to enter into a rebuild phase. And in the rebuild phase, it's leveraging the wars, the genocide, and everything it's been doing right now in order to accumulate as many assets as possible for the financial industrial complex so that it can negotiate a strategic exit, a decolonization, because America's debt needs to focus on being a regional power because BRICS has fought against it. And in this process, the final disgusting, and by the way, if you haven't watched my style, when I put my humanitarian hat on, I'm as disgusted that the world works like this as you. But when I put my analysis hat on, I follow the money and I take a less emotional approach because I'm not giving commentary on what I would like to happen. What I would like to happen is very different to what I believe is happening by following the financial flows. So I think Netanyahu has got somewhat rogue, but he's trying to make himself as useful an asset to the military industrial complex, because the more damage the military does in its last exercise, the more negotiation for the financial industrial complex, and Netanyahu gets to prevent himself being dumped and ending up in prison or assassinated. And so Netanyahu is negotiating his exit right now because Israel as a brand, as a colony for creating the forever wars is no longer useful. And they've negotiated a more profitable model, which is investing in the region because it can harness nuclear energy, artificial intelligence and data center builds, and various other things. And so we are going through that transition. And it only happened because China negotiated normalization between Iran and Saudi. The GCC and BRICS aligned against de-dollarization, and the America had to negotiate a strategic exit, which was manifested in the tariff policy, followed by the big beautiful bill as a stimulus as well, which we covered before. Now, obviously, out of this, although China did all the hard work and everyone in the region, and MBS and Saudi negotiated their decolonization by partnering and getting wealthy enough where they had the power to do that, and by being backed by BRICS and Iran joining BRICS and the various other factions, they've now given themselves enough power to be in this negotiation point and this changing time in history. And so Trump obviously wants to take credit for everything. And he was installed with the promise of you get the Nobel Peace Prize. So China continues to back and make BRICS more powerful, including adding its members like Iran and Western allies like UAE and Egypt. Egypt was vassalized through the IMF. UAE has bought its freedom through its own sovereign wealth, but it has managed the relationship between America and China by partnering and working with both. Egypt has been taking on less and less IMF debt and has joined various reconstruction projects with the China's Belt and Road Initiative. And so therefore, we have been in this struggle, and Iran has done a partnership where it is exporting record levels of oil to China, which is funding its ability to continue to resist. The resistance factions are holding back against Israel's colonial expansion, which is a colony of America, in order to utilize the profits of the military-industrial complex by creating those forever wars. But now the industry, by getting backed by BRICS, has entered into a new phase. So the GCC, headed up by Saudi Arabia, by UAE and Qatar, which is measured by the size of their sovereign wealth, have basically become a regional autonomy with some legacy issues. That there is Israel still being used as a US colony for the profits of the military-industrial complex, and it is trying to negotiate its exit so that it eventually can sit in the center of the world and have a very compelling future by balancing its Western interests and its Eastern powers, the falling empire with the rising empire, and make sure that it gets as much assets, foreign direct investment, and deals negotiated for BlackRock and the Proof of Weapons Network, who basically, if they invest in the region, are financially incentivized to not return it to a forever war. And this is the multipolar world order. And BlackRock has basically reset its portfolio to match this reality, which is why you're seeing a change in the structure of what its mutual funds are investing in, and a slow transition to this new reality. Because BlackRock is essentially the CEO as the largest asset manager for the Proof of Weapons Network, and the Proof of Weapons Network, through military deep state control, control over intelligence, essentially has completely vassalized the European Union, the UK, the United States, and is now vassalizing Israel by doing somewhat of a controlled demolition in order to hand over effective control in this partnership between the Western BlackRock proof of weapons network, partnering and normalizing with the GCC, backed by BRICS, which is a competing power structure, which requires normalization with Iran, which requires the solution to the Palestinian colonial, violent, settler colonial expansive project once and for all. And so, but where are the profits going to be made up? Well, you do defense contracts with Saudi Arabia and those countries, which is what Trump was negotiating and why BlackRock and all of the proof of weapons network pundits were there. You have Palantir contracts for surveillance and control. And rather than creating war, you essentially continue and escalate the hot war within Europe. And you make up the profits there by the ECB and the European Union perpetuating the narrative that they're defending democracy so that the Europeans and the Brits can pretend that there's justification for why their governments are not spending any money on infrastructure and instead sending it all over to Zelensky so that America can do a fake GDP print and support the proof of weapons network so that Americans think that their economy is prospering while they're losing more wealth through inflation. And eventually it's leading to the type of civil unrest that we're seeing that then ushers in the surveillance state that we covered in the macro section. Also, you need to push narratives that China is about to reunify with Taiwan so that you can spend more in Japan, in Taiwan, in Philippines, in South Korea. But at the same time, you get those military defense contracts, but they never escalate to actual military operations because the financial industrial complex is investing in this multipolar world order with BRICS and these regional powers rather than the global hegemon, so they can manage the portfolio. So I believe that we are witnessing the end and the final stages of the forever war and the strategic tension that was created between Iran and Israel in the Middle East. And that's why I talked about the theatrics and the play-by-play of how everything was agreed and negotiated, I believe, through the regional powers in what was never going to be a war that was going to lead to World War III. And while I was on X Spaces, everyone was panicking, saying it's World War III, and I was just following the markets and saying, this is theater. Okay. Essentially, it was the end of what is called Operation Gladio. If you've read the book Operation Gladio by Peter Williams, where they create and fund, the West creates and funds terrorists and creates these groups like ISIS and Al-Qaeda that they call stay-at-home militia armies. And then they create all these narratives in order to launder money through these drug trafficking, human trafficking, weapons trafficking network through intelligence agencies that protect corporate interest, and you vassalize through lobby the governments and make people think that they've got a democracy. But people keep asking me, who are the proof of weapons network? Now, a while ago, if you're a longer term listener, you'll know that in Bitcoin Hard Talk, I created a video. And what I want to do right now is play a video for you. What we're doing is we're playing around with artificial intelligence to make these longer form contents more consumable for those that don't necessarily have the time. So I went through one of my old videos where I described some of the key players in the proof of weapons network. It's essentially a decentralized network measured by your monetary wealth, money and power. And when you make the wrong moves, you can be overthrown, assassinated, taken out by a blackmail ring, and then your wealth decreases, so you have less control and power over the network. And it's almost like a decentralized network that's not accountable to state because it controls state. And it has, the deep state in there as well. So it's lawless and control over certain aspects of judicial. But when you're not a part of the network anymore, i.e. like a mafia, just when I thought I was out, they pull me back in. If you don't play the role, then the judicial can be weaponized to come against you, and lawfare can be used and various other tactics. But the point is, it controls government. It's layers. The government is only layer 3. Layer 2 is intelligence, and the proof of weapons network by controlling monetary flows is layer 1. So what I want to do right now is play for you, and let me know in the comments section whether you like this format. It was very popular last week, but I'm just going to play a little bit of an AI summary that took my video on the proof of weapons network, condensed it down, and articulated, a review on the proof of weapons network. And then we're going to play that, and then I'm going to get back into everything that happened this week, and we're going to roll this final section out with an example of how you can control the process and a successful campaign. So Azad, now over to you. We're going to play the AI summary of the proof of weapons network.
In Bitcoin, and a concept, something he calls the proof of weapons network. Welcome to the deep dive. Today we're going to dive into, well, a pretty powerful idea for understanding maybe why the world feels so chaotic sometimes, especially when you look at global finance. Our source today is Simon Dixon, a real pioneer in finance and Bitcoin, and a concept, something he calls the proof of weapons network.
Yeah, Simon Dixon is fascinating. He has this knack for pulling together economics, tech, and geopolitics in a way few others do. And he's not just talking theory. He actually called the 2008 crisis. He co-founded Blink to the Future, which, backed huge names like Kraken, Coinbase.
Right, and he even advised El Salvador on their Bitcoin move.
President Bukele, yeah. So he's definitely been in the trenches trying to figure out what he calls the architecture of control.
Okay, so this proof of weapons network, it sounds pretty intense. What does he actually mean by that? He says it's not some secret club, right?
Exactly, not a conspiracy theory like that. Dixon basically calls it a mafia-style, debt-based Ponzi scheme. He traces it back to the Bank of England, like 1694, funding the British Empire. And he argues the U.S. Federal Reserve kind of took over that model later on. The core idea is that it thrives on concentrated wealth. It actually needs inequality to work.
Inequality is a feature, not a bug.
That's his argument, yeah. And its fuel, its drug, as he puts it, is debt, constant debt.
So if it's an operating system, not a, shadowy group pulling strings, who are the key players? Who makes up this network?
Well, he lays out a few key groups. Foundational are the central banks. Think the Fed, obviously, but coordinated through the Bank for International Settlements, the BIS.
The central banks for central banks?
Right. They're kind of the architects. Yeah. Then you have the huge asset managers. BlackRock, Vanguard, State Street. It's these guys. Through the sheer amount of assets they manage, they indirectly control, tons of shares and board seats globally. He mentions tools like BlackRock's Aladdin AI platform.
Oh, yeah, Aladdin. That gives them a massive view of the market, right?
A huge view and huge influence. But it's not just public markets. He also points to private equity and hedge funds.
The deep state firms, he calls them.
Yeah, like KKR, Blackstone. Their specialty, Dixon says, is coming in after a crisis, think reconstruction contracts, and buying up assets when they're dirt cheap. Then, of course, the global banks. JP Morgan, Goldman Sachs, Citi, HSBC. Many are shareholders of the Fed itself. They create the complex financial products that, often get governments deeper in debt.
Okay, so banks, asset managers, private equity. What else?
Multinational corporations. Big tech, Google, Apple, Microsoft controlling the digital pipes. Big energy, ExxonMobil, Shell controlling resources. Dixon argues they aren't really loyal to any single country. They operate globally.
Stateless powers, almost.
Yeah.
And then you have individuals, old money and new.
Exactly. He mentions the billionaire families, like the Rothschilds and Rockefellers, who he argues were key in setting up central banking in the first place, and now they're joined by, the modern tech billionaires, Musk, Bezos, and others.
And who enforces all this?
That's where the intelligence agencies come in, according to Dixon. MI6, CIA, Mossad, he calls them the enforcers, using things like covert operations, regime changes, and psychological ops or psyops to kind of control wealth flows and resources behind the scenes.
Wow, okay. That's quite a network structure. So how does it actually work? What's the playbook?
The main engine, he says, is debt as a weapon. The whole system is like a Ponzi scheme because when banks create money by making loans, they create the principal, but not the money needed to pay the interest on that principal.
So there's never enough money to pay everything back.
Precisely. Which means you constantly need more debt, new loans, just to service the old debt. It's a treadmill. And this spills over into financial warfare. using financial tools like sanctions, economic pressure, currency manipulation, often structured through bodies like the IMF and the World Bank.
And they influence politics directly, too.
Oh, absolutely. Huge amounts of capital go into lobbying, funding campaigns. Dixon basically says they rent parliaments. Plus, setting policy agendas through groups like the World Economic Forum and enforcing financial rules via things like the Financial Action Task Force, FATF.
So against this backdrop, this proof of weapons system, which Dixon says requires control, violence, endless debt, he contrasts it with Bitcoin.
Right. He presents Bitcoin's proof of work as the alternative. Peaceful, decentralized. He actually calls Bitcoin a kind of speculative attack on the whole central banking model.
An exit from financial oppression, I think he says.
Yeah, it's a powerful framing.
So Dixon's point seems to be that understanding this network, this proof of weapons system, is step one if you want to reclaim some kind of personal sovereignty. What really stands out is this idea that the system isn't broken. It was built this way, on purpose.
Which really makes you wonder, doesn't it? If the global financial system is structured like this, like a debt-based Ponzi scheme, how does that change how you think about stability, about security, the future of money?
And maybe the biggest question he leaves us with, how might something like Bitcoin, a decentralized alternative, actually shift that power balance? Definitely something to chew on.
Okay, hope you enjoyed that review. Let me know in the comments section what you think. And we're going to be doing more and more like this to try and, bring out more condensed ways of explaining things that might take me a little bit longer. So without further ado, let's jump in. Everything that happened this week. And as usual, the news flow is as big as ever, but it's getting more and more predictable, even though most people are seeing it as more and more uncertainty. So if you're a long-term listener of Bitcoin Hard Talk, you'll know that we were expecting the next stages, while we may not get the order right, but by following the money, the next stages is that we're going to enter into a ceasefire in Gaza, and then we're going to have some kind of Netanyahu exit and destabilization campaign as well. And I covered just before that video the types of things we were looking for. So what did we see this week? So there was meant to be on Monday the Netanyahu court case within Israel, where he is meant to be going down for corruption. And it's a solid case. If you've watched the documentary, The BB Files, you'll know that there is, all of the evidence that was leaked of all of his corruption and bribery and all the different stuff. So it's a solid case, which is why prior to October the 7th, he was coming after the judicial branch in order to make sure that the executive branch wasn't a democracy, and that was causing unrest within Israel and lots of protests. And then October the 7th happened. So he was meant to go to court on Monday, and that was delayed. And then immediately Trump came out and put a couple of tweets out there, because my personal belief, my opinion, is that in Netanyahu negotiating his exit, this war criminal, satanic demon that is just extending a genocide in order to have more power with the proof of weapons network and the military industrial complex, in order to make sure he doesn't go to prison or get hung or stoned or whatever his fate is for the crimes against humanity that he's committed, is obviously extending this in order to be more useful and negotiate his exit. And part of that, I believe, that they said Trump needs to make you look good. And so Trump called out and did a couple of posts on Truth Social. One of them was saying, he's a hero. They're treating him so bad. How could they be doing any of this to him? And there was a couple of Truth Social posts along that line, essentially whitewashing the crimes against humanity that Netanyahu has committed, and even taking pressure on the MAGA base because Netanyahu is just so unpopular, even amongst the Israelis and the Americans as well. And so, that operation, I believe we will find out, is part of whatever the negotiated exit is for Netanyahu. Now, what else did we get? We had an initial announcement of a 60-day ceasefire. As I said and predicted, that would be significantly better than the Abraham Shield version, which was leaked by Israel. And I covered last week, which was like the worst type of thing. In a nutshell, I'm not going to go through it again, but the Abraham Shield was essentially like Abraham Accords 1 by Trump. It was sidestepping Iran and pretending there's no Palestinian state so that the whole region could unify against Iran, and the Greater Israel Project could be funded by the military-industrial complex, and then a rebuild happens once you vassalize Iran, and then you ethnically cleanse the Palestinians. Because that is no longer feasible, the 30-day ceasefire reflected that we're going to be moving towards a significantly better solution than that. Now, no negotiation gives you exactly what you want. And if I were in charge, this isn't what I want, but I know we're moving directionally in the direction that I think we've been discussing. And so the ceasefire agreement was on significantly better terms. And there was a safeguard in there to move towards a permanent ceasefire. Now, we've seen all this before. We know that these can be tactics. Now, and if it wasn't for my geopolitical belief around what's happening here by following the money, I would be extremely skeptical and think this is a trick to get greater, into further genocide, ethnic cleansing. But I believe that all those efforts have failed, and therefore the GCC solution, because Egypt and Jordan didn't accept the IMF money, they wouldn't ethnically cleanse. Hamas continued to resist, and the Palestinians are still on the land. Iran engaged in the theater back and forth that was weakening Israel, taking out some of the hardliners in Iran, and having a theater for America to say they wiped out the nuclear program. And we covered that in great detail last week, so I'm not going to do it again. But essentially, the Abraham Shield was replaced with this coordinated strike from Israel to Iran and that theater. So we're no longer having the worst case scenario that I covered last week and the Abraham Shield or any of that type of thing. So what have we got this week coming up? Well, we got Netanyahu is due to visit the White House on Monday instead of going to his court case that was delayed by 1 week. I'm not sure what we're exactly going to get, but I'm expecting, if I speculate, announcements around a potential agreement, for the actual confirmation of the ceasefire. And it may happen right now, maybe within this weekend or now or by Monday. Hamas would most likely agree to the terms of the ceasefire. I am expecting that there may be hiccups, but I'm expecting this to move to the final solution. And I think there'll be all sorts of problems that will go along, but I'm not expecting this to be one of those destabilization campaigns like it was before. So I'm expecting the eventual, after this, during this campaign, or maybe even after it, some kind of civil unrest campaign within Israel, where essentially the same campaigns they used on the Middle East and that they started to use in UK and EU and now using in America will also be used within Israel, leading to some kind of regime change within Israel and the eventual fall of the cabinet. I'm then expecting a lifting of sanctions eventually within Syria and then within Iran as we get further and further down this negotiation, and then the vassalization of Israel into eventual announcement of some kind of Abraham Accords 2 with an actual Palestine solution, and a movement towards more vassalization of Israel into the GCC, the military-industrial complex exiting, and even potentially, at best, a one-state solution that returns Palestine to what it was before, which is equal rights for Jewish, Christians, Muslims, and a normal immigration policy before all the colonial, settler, and colonization, rape, stealing, massacring, and settler colonial Western project came in and started to cause all the atrocities that we are now over a century into as well. So I think the US, what did we see this week anyway? Well, there was confirmations that the US has been offering Iran very attractive things in order to engage in this process. Some of the things that they've been offering is lifting sanctions, as I said, releasing certain assets that were sanctioned, which is in the millions, I think about $36 million of assets. Those were slowly being released. Remember how Jordan Peterson framed it as Biden is paying $6 billion to Iran? No, that was the nuclear deal where the money that they had confiscated from Iran was slowly being released. I think they've been offering that same type of deal as well before Trump tore up the deal for the Greater Israel Project and the Military Industrial Complex Project. They've also been offering huge infrastructure incentives. Remember that I said the nuclear weapon thing is just the narrative for the media. It's actually about nuclear energy. After basically, so those have all been offered. These are leaking, and we've been having movements towards the directional thing that I think I've been sharing. Also this week, we had basically a secret session that was leaked between Netanyahu, the head of Mossad, and the Amman division. The Israeli court basically said that it is agreed to the Prime Minister's request not to hold its hearing this week. And that was based upon saying there's too much war going on, which is why we had the escalation towards Lebanon and those escalations this week as well. The Pentagon announced that Iran's nuclear program has been destroyed, and they said that it has been delayed for 2 years, which provided the exact type of narrative that's needed in order to move to what I believe will be a 2-year denuclearization negotiation between Iran and Israel, because essentially I believe the military industrial complex that controls US's nuclear program is the same infrastructure that controls Israel's program. And I don't believe for a second that the Samson order was, put out there because they can actually put a nuke on America, as the intelligence and the leak said, because it is a colony for America rather than with a plausible deniability story. And this is America's genocide as well. And the Israeli army, the IDF, were radicalized and recruited for this Western interest project because it made so much money for military contractors. In fact, $10 trillion has been printed and handed over just in the proof of weapons network profits, stolen from the American people, handed over to the American corporations that have now built this global network that is not America first. So anyway, this 2-year delay really lays the foundation for such a structure. So you push out the narrative that Israel's trying to nuke America and Europe and it's got nukes filed at them. You release the JFK files that helps you realize, if you haven't watched my documentary that I put out there on NUMEC and why JFK was assassinated, it's on the blog of simondixon.com. I did an 8-minute overview of the AI version to make it easier for you. Please watch that as well. You can get that on my blog. But this is precisely what Iran needed to basically allow the IAEA, which is the Western-funded soft power structure that inspects nuclear countries that have nuclear weapons, which was inspecting Iran all along and said that Iran doesn't have a nuclear weapon, which is what the CIA's intelligence and Tulsi Gabbard testified in Congress, that then we were moving towards the theater. They suddenly said, oh yeah, the IAEA said that they've got nuclear weapons, because they said that all of these inspections was Mossad deep state operations, and they've had inspections all along. So we know this whole thing is theater and bullshit narrative control. But now the Iran has pulled out for the first time of the IAEA inspections, which it was still doing even after Trump cancelled and tore up the nuclear deal. So 2 years from today, I believe that this is the perfect narrative for moving towards the denuclearization of Israel, which was part of what I believe the negotiation between the US decolonization project, because the GCC and BRICS created the resistance movement. So what else did we have come out? Iran's president, basically Pezeshkian, sorry if I'm saying it correctly, basically signed a law that approved in the Iranian parliament that suspended the cooperation with the IAEA. So that now means that we've no longer got those nuclear inspections, which paves the way for having the strategic, if this deal goes down at some time, you can then blame and go backwards. And if you're investing with the financial industrial complex in the stabilization of the Middle Eastern region, and you want to go back to the military industrial complex because something goes wrong as we enter into that, this is the perfect way of going back to that, because now the inspectors are leaving Iran. So as a result of this, we got a worse deal, which is how you know that this was, I think, a negotiated and agreed upon outcome as well. All agreed up front and in advance. Now, by the way, that doesn't mean that I think Iran and Israel are friends. They're not. They're enemies. But this is how diplomacy works. And I don't believe they signed off on civilian casualties. This is just Israel doing what they do best, killing civilians. And things can go wrong, or you can have rogue elements because they do hate each other at the end of the day. So they do what they've always done, which is killing civilians. So, yeah, I believe that this is kind of a narrative that leads to Israel denuclearization as well, which I think will be a slow movement after we get the cabinet overthrow as well. The Iranian deputy foreign minister came out and said that Tehran received information from its intermediaries that the US does not plan any regime change in Iran. So I was saying I don't believe that Ayatollah Khamenei is going to be regime changed, but I do believe it was signed off on the hardliners that were agreed to be assassinated because they wouldn't agree with the general direction. And that there is no plan of action to assassinate the supreme leader. So that was leaked, and that was from the Iran side agreeing that their intelligence has confirmed that with the US intelligence. Also, the Iranian president came out and said, we are ready to start a new page in relations with the Gulf countries. So more confirmation that these different types of things are being leaked now that Iran is able to go back to its people and say, we're resisting, we're coming from a place of power, but there is a new, regional vision that they pragmatically need to go into as well. The Iranian parliament passed a law that basically said that the use of Elon Musk Starlink is prohibited, which is the surveillance part of the US colonies that basically integrates with Palantir. And so that's not going to be allowed within Iran, which I believe was part of their negotiations as well. Trump signed up to an executive order to remove all sanctions on Syria. And so that was progressed. But the deal hasn't been announced yet because the final deal of the whole region hasn't been announced yet. Saudi Arabia basically came out and reiterated that it requires a two-state solution and a movement, real concrete steps towards Palestinian statehood before it will enter into any kind of normalization. Syria decided that it announced its puppet government, which I believe is for GCC, Turkey, and other regional interests. And any land that Israel conquers right now will be vassalized into GCC control in the end negotiation that it moves towards. Syria basically announced that it is linking its negotiations over the Golan Heights, which is the occupied territory that Israel said it was just going in temporarily, but now fully occupies. And I don't believe you will see any objection from Iran backing any type of resistance. They are now, I believe, on their own, because this was the agreement from the Iran side. So Yemen decided that it would fire a ballistic missile on Israel, which was followed by drone attacks on Yemen from the Israeli side. Israel closed down its airspaces. And so I believe that Israel and US may be planning for some kind of attack on Yemen. And I don't expect that Iran will push back, and they'll be autonomous in their decision-making process as we move towards this normalization. They've already said we won't stop firing at Israeli shipments until there is an acceptable solution to Hamas. And so Hamas needs to agree before there will be any pushback from the Yemen side. So whether that needs to escalate or not is dependent upon the agreement that is being put forth here. Trump came out and said that he'll be sending another 510 million in 2,000-pound bombs and guidance systems to Israel. So that's a little bit contradictory to what I think is happening here. Whether that actually happens or whether there's it wasn't in the big beautiful bill. So we'll follow the money and make sure we understand what happens. Whether that's just posturing, moving into the negotiations, or whether that is actually going to happen would determine whether we think there's more escalation to de-escalate in this process. And at the same time, Iran is moving more and more towards autonomy based upon its BRICS membership. So immediately, Iran received, after the de-escalation, some 40 China-made I'm not a military person, so J-10C fighter jets that were equipped with AESA radars. And so China is supporting Iran's air defense as well. Also, PL-15 BVY missiles. China's showing that it's supporting Israel. Iran. So this again is based upon the power structure that Iran gets to be autonomous, based upon its BRICS membership. The GCC gets to negotiate. Iran stops the resistance because there's no need for resistance. The resistance normalizes into the new power structure. Israel vassalizes into the GCC, and BlackRock gets its negotiated exit of the military-industrial complex as the financial-industrial complex gets to play some of its game theory based upon the current negotiation. It also had some more modern aviation equipment. And so I think that really says that there may not be a return to the war between Iran and Israel. But if it does, I think it would be scripted based upon the new power structure. We also had an announcement from Syria that it will be exploring the import of gas from Israel. So this would be a kind of negotiation as well, because that would provide funding. And if it's once the vassalization agreement, just like it was for Egypt and Jordan, it had to buy gas from Israel. And so we'll follow some of these monetary flows as well. It was agreed to announce that Sheba farms are not Lebanese, but they are Syrian. So these were the disputed territory where Hezbollah was kind of a neutral zone between Israel and Lebanon. And so Syria agreed that it would classify Sheba farms not Lebanese, but Syrian. So this is another negotiation point as well that I think is being reset. What else did we get here? And so, whether we get some more escalations and anything that needs to happen with the Hezbollah side, my main point here is that I think that Iran will stand back in all of this because Iran is already moving to the negotiated solutions. Okay. Right. So that's all the things that happened this week. And as usual, I just want to make sure you understand how disgusting this is, putting back the humanitarian side as well. Just this morning, Israel forces, the IDF, through their program, killed 73 Palestinian civilians, and they've been doing an average of about 100 per day. 25% of them were just gunned down, and that was gunned down while they were visiting or trying to stand in line for their desperately needed food, based upon a quote-unquote American GHF, Gaza Humanitarian Foundation, which has turned out to be Gaza Holocaust Foundation, an American operation that has been executed by the IDF and Israel in order to deliver just enough food but shoot down Palestinians as the negotiations are happening. Not only is Israel blockading Gaza, it is also weaponizing hunger, and it's been happening every single day. The Palestinians are being starved throughout this whole thing. They're losing more and more people. Even Harvard said they estimate 200,000 Palestinians have not made it. And at the same time, they're attempting to claim the Palestinians are just basically attempting to claim their basic right for food, queuing up, and they're being massacred periodically so that many of them are too scared to actually come. If you don't think this is a genocide at this point, then I don't know what planet you've been living on. They're met with live fire every time they try and get food. According to field reports by Israeli IDF soldiers, they're basically under orders, as we know, the settler terrorists that are, they're weaponized by state-sponsored terrorism. And so in this, the IDF, they're told, they're under orders at the highest level, the top. These aren't rogue people, to just fire into the crowds as they gather, Palestinians that need aid, that are starving, at these strategic points, which are essentially massacre points. They're basically weaponizing food, and as they get to in these food lines, they're basically killing zones as well. This is how the proof of weapons network works. This is how dehumanized this network is. And if you studied the history, you know that this was, CIA level, based upon an Italian mafia, Nazis from World War II, integrated into the CIA when they combined with the Jewish mob that were managing the financial flows via the Vatican Bank in order to fund these black ops through human trafficking, weapons trafficking, and drug trafficking as well. So that's how this system works. But I don't want to end too depressed as well, because as I put the humanitarian hat on, I want to remind people that there is a resistance against this, and we are moving towards negotiations while they weaponize genocide. I'm hopeful that we enter into a much, much better outcome. And we're already starting to see the BBC journalists, 100 of them, already came out and said that they were forced to do PR for Israel. They're leaving their jobs, and they're, spreading the truth that the BBC's controlled, which is obviously USAID funded. This just makes an absolute mockery of Western journalism. It is Operation Mockingbird, where the CIA, the deep state, control the media in order to control people. Basically, it messages that all BBC has always been controlled media, just like Fox News, just like CNN. We know at the very top of these media structures, they're private companies that are controlled through these Operation Mockingbirds, and they're used to inflict power. And now we've got a resistance against that, which is social media and those algorithms. But, you know, the legacy media and the BBC will always be remembered for their role in this genocide. And 100 of the journalists standing out against it. They know that every piece of media they put out, which is funded by these USAID budgets, has to get approval. And the deep state, Mossad, CIA, MI6, are controlling these different narratives. This was also used, as we covered in part 2, in the macro side, on the Ukraine side. So on Ukraine, we know that they want people to believe that they should join the army and fight for their country, even though Zelensky is just a conduit for the same military industrial complex and proof of weapons network that essentially has controls and vassalized EU, UK, US, and now turning on Israel to exit as well. And so what did we have from the other proof of weapons network? Well, Russia launches basically its largest drone swarm from the entire war onto Ukraine. So there was 500 plus drones and missiles. And this was launched in a single day and a single night. That's a record. And we know that there's lots more money to be made by pretending that Ukrainians can fight back against this. So we're seeing that they're targeting energy fields, because we know who ends up with this: BlackRock, the vassalization of Ukraine in order to control land based upon pretending and making up for lost profits to get the ECB to print money, the Bank of England to print money, and then they can borrow it via these leveraged financial products and weapons of mass destruction through the IMF, UK government, and then they can use that to collateralize the land so that they can get the rare earth minerals and the resources that are needed, and the rebuild back better contracts exerted through Palantir surveillance, which is why they're destroying all these places in the first place. So Russia is basically targeting energy, taking down the energy so it can be rebuilt. They're taking down refineries, destroying infrastructure, airfields as well, logistics. And the US has now announced that this is an interesting one. It's halting shipments to Ukraine, citing concerns over whether the animation and air defense, basically, there's shortages within America, and basically for American forces and allies. Now, this could either be a fear campaign in order to get some of that big, beautiful bill budget, and think it would be. But also you can imagine there's elements of truth in this as well, because they need to ramp up their sales. They need more money to be printed. And that was everything we covered in the macro section as well. So that's everything that happened this week in the geopolitical side. Now, I want to end in something positive. Now, we take our small wins where we can, but by following the money, I would like you to know, once you understand how the proof of weapons network works, you know that the only way to control government is to be a part of the lobby. Join the proof of weapons network, which is essentially what the GCC countries, they've taken their sovereign wealth, they're doing partnership with the proof of weapons network to decolonize, buy their freedom, and high net worth investors can do that as well. So as you become more wealthy, you can contribute to lobby if you want to do that. And this is why what the crypto and Bitcoin community did in order to get the ability for people to self-custody. And the one good thing that did come out of the Trump administration is they did, because he wanted to get rich with Bitcoin, he allowed Americans to get rich with Bitcoin too. And so that is the one promise that actually got delivered. So you are getting more and more freedom to be able to free yourself with Bitcoin. But most people are falling for doing it with BlackRock and giving them more power as well. But anyway, once you understand how this system works, you understand that it is profit motives of this proof of weapons network that weaponizes ideology, and money equals power. And so the more money you have, the more power you have in the proof of weapons network. And they can turn on power by controlling how much money they have. And that is why boycotts are such a powerful thing. And you becoming conscious with your money and boycotting, ultimately using Bitcoin, beating the system, gaining more economic power in order to actually impact the system as well. So I want to give you an effective fight that actually happens against the proof of weapons network. Now, it's a small example, and I'd like to give more examples because it can be depressing, as I said, but this was a small victory. So a co-op Alianza, which is essentially Italy's biggest retail co-op, it axed all of its Israel goods. So they were only, basically they replaced all of the goods that this large co-op of retail in Italy. They said, we're not going to buy anything from Israel. And they replaced it with Gaza brands. Now, they had like a Gaza Cola and various other Palestinian brands. But basically they did that. They made that statement. And I believe personally, the why this happened was not because this company suddenly had an epiphany and is watching the genocide and can't take anymore. It's because it wasn't for activism. It was for profit. And I want you to understand that we could judge people and say, well, you're only doing it to make more money. But it doesn't matter. Because if that is how the system works, then we should reward that good behavior and make it more profitable to not support this genocide and not support the proof of weapons network and exert our actual power, which is in reality, the government needs the lobby money. The lobby gets more money by corporations being more profit. They get more profit by us consuming their products. So in reality, if we pull together and control our money, we ultimately do have the power that we need over the real power, which is the corporate structure, rather than engaging in futile politics, which is why I think they want you believing that Labour, Conservative, Republican, Democrat actually makes a difference, because it only makes a difference if you're a lobbyist. And that means you need to get rich. So let's get the power structure right. And then let's not engage in futile activities. Let's engage in the real activities where we do have the power as well. And this is an example. So I looked into this co-op, and this co-op has the amount of Israeli products that they were actually gaining revenue from was 0.1% of their revenue. So it was insignificant whether they continued this or not. But they got free PR, and people started shopping at these servers because of this move. And so they gave up 0.1% of their revenue and got a massive PR boost, which was completely free. Now, when you look at the polls in Italy, 66% of Italians are anti-Israel, according to some of the surveys. So the majority are anti-Israel. Now, BlackRock has this ridiculous network that they use to control the corporations called ESG. And basically, the financial industrial complex, they offer more favorable rates for loans based upon your ESG score. And your ESG score basically rewards conflict-free companies. And so this could be updating, which is why I believe that BlackRock is not ideologically aligned. It is profit motivated, and it will dump Zionism in Israel slowly in order to increase profits. And that is the negotiated thing. So they will give ESG score to that, which will reduce the rates as well. And so it is more profitable. I believe that sat in their boardroom, they basically get to be more profitable by us expressing that this is the preference and us spending our money more ethically and in line with our beliefs. So they get to protect, their protest risk is gone, because the more protests that are happening, and I'm not talking about the ones that are infiltrated and turned into looting based upon, putting in, deep state campaigns, and they start shooting at people, pretend that they're waving a flag, and they infiltrate that. But anyway, the risk of protests goes away because they're aligned with what the protesters want. And their margins go up. They will make more money from this move. Now, do we need to care that they're only doing it to make money? I don't think so, because we need to play them at the game, which is things only move when money moves. And so basically just being neutral on Gaza is, the switching cost that is involved on not working with Israel and moving from those suppliers means that it's more profitable to not be neutral. And so now activists that were trying to essentially, I looked at the movements in the BDS, they were coming after this co-op for approximately 20 years, dating back to like the apartheid, the Palestinian Israel, early protests, and also the apartheid South African ones. But now they listen all of a sudden because they're sat in the boardroom and they're doing their profit and loss calculations. So if we can make it profitable to for the proof of weapons network to engage in different trades, I think we can learn from what's happening in the Middle East as well. Because the market is, at the end of the day, what they factor in. And we saw with Starbucks that when Muslims in Malaysia were boycotting Starbucks, and it really impacted their bottom line because an executive was supporting illegal settlements, that had an impact on the share price of Starbucks, and that led to the overthrow of the board to one that wasn't supporting the settlements. So the moral of the story is, you may think that this is small relative to the genocide that is happening, but I think we should celebrate these victories, and we should recognize that they don't want you to know this. They really don't want you to know this, which is why they're coming after protesters. They're coming after BDS. They're making out like it's just some crazy leftist woke thing. And there's a lot of that going on. But I'm not a leftist. I'm not woke, and I use Bitcoin in order to build economic power. And that gave me the sovereign freedom because I can try and work with countries to utilize hard money to make their government smaller so we can take on the proof of weapons network. That's not leftist, wokeist. That is proactive. And that's the same thing that I think we can build an army of people proactively engaging in that. So I want you to use your money to get results, just as this campaign. The politicians don't work for you. They work for the corporate lobby. So unless you're going to join those corporate lobby, less time trying to influence that, because it's not going to make a difference. They'll listen to you, but they'll do what their lobbies say. But where does the lobby get their money? They get their lobby from profits from these corporations, and they need your money to pull together, particularly in some of these retail brands. So we change the world through our own money. And I put a tweet out there on X, a post out there on X in order to make people reflect that. This is what, remember, the genocide and the proof of weapons network is what backs the dollar. It's a global network of violence. It's a global network of debt. It's a military crony capitalist system that's epitomized in the big, beautiful bill. The dollar's not backed by gold. It's not backed by productivity. It's not backed by labor. It's not backed by any of these things, which is why the gold standard was removed in the first place in 1971. Covered this many times on BitcoinHardTalk. Why was it removed? Because they needed to keep funding the Vietnamese war. They needed to fire chemical weapons, and they ran out of money because everyone was asking for their gold back. So they removed the gold standard. They changed it to unlimited money printing backed by a debt-based Ponzi scheme that allowed the proof of weapons network to grow so large where you could print fake GDP by printing money and handing it over to these corporations through the proof of weapons network. So that in 1971, basically, they had to just completely cut the tie to sound money, and they replaced it with the printing press. And ever since then, that is what weaponized this network. In the 80s, BlackRock was created. They started investing in Aladdin and the artificial intelligence technology. But when in 2008, we had the Bitcoin white paper, for the first time, without storing gold and being incredibly wealthy, everybody was able to own more Bitcoin this month than the previous month. They were able to boycott the Federal Reserve with Bitcoin to give less power to the proof of weapons network. They were able to opt out of inflation, opt out of debt slavery by beating every asset class and becoming more wealthy. And that is still the opportunity that exists today. I can't give financial advice, but sovereign power means that you are no longer subject to this centralized control and centralized power. You can choose a peaceful, decentralized monetary system for your savings, and you can opt out of the system and you get the ultimate benefit from that. Now, by not holding it in custody with BlackRock through their ETFs, and giving them more economic power to become the largest shareholder in all of the different proof of weapons network companies, and by holding your Bitcoin in self-custody instead, you get the benefit of that, and you get to boycott BlackRock as well. You basically don't let Wall Street profit from this new this mechanism that Bitcoin has created from digital hard sound money beating all asset classes, and you get to drain the BlackRock Bitcoin ETF by owning it in self-custody as well, to the extent that you can. As I said, I understand when you have some money locked up in some of these pension structures and various other things. But this is how you take back control, engaging in exercises that actually make a difference. And even if they don't make the biggest difference, they make the difference to you, as it did for me, as it did for many of us. So you can boycott the banks by not allowing them to profit from war, by essentially building your wealth and becoming debt-free, not borrowing against your Bitcoin, returning to the theological, Abrahamic, warning against usury and against interest, because this was all forecasted for us. But even then, if you own your own assets, you don't contribute. You boycott the banks that are fueling this proof of weapons network. Every loan, every interest payment, every single one feeds a system built upon conflict. Your money's been used against you in something that's not even aligned with your ideological beliefs. Now you can free yourself from the grip. You can boycott the global corporations by, basically, where you can buy by spending in things that are more ideologically aligned with you. You can spend local from the farmer. I've started looking at all the labels, within our family, my wife, she started looking, the honey comes from, Yemen, and the dates come from, we started looking at what we saw, that there were some dates that came from Israel. And instead, does that support the Palestinians because it's in the West Bank? Or is there a structure on top? Should we be doing that? You ask the questions. Are we buying our eggs from the big the big supermarkets, or can we get it from our local farmers? And there's health benefits to that as well, because we don't get all of the stuff that's put in between. We get to ask the questions. So become more conscious with how you're spending your money, and collectively we can impact the businesses. And all of these businesses, the large global multinational institutions, we can't do everything. We have to understand, look, if I end up with a phone that I know contributes to stealing resources from Africa, that's based upon funding through Rwanda, that fuels M23 and ISIS and Al-Qaeda in order to steal weapons, I still can be more effective by having a phone that can use artificial intelligence. But maybe there is alternative routes we can go. We can't get it perfect, but we can become more conscious. And the more conscious we become in the practicality of the world today, we can sum up, am I more effective, even though I know I'm contributing to the proof of weapons network, but I'm able to get the message out to more people to combat the proof of weapons network. Think like businesses. They have profit and loss. They have balance sheets. They make these decisions. Start making your own collective balance sheet, your own profit and loss, and start thinking about the energy that money comes with. What boycotting can you do with that? We can stop this together by de-weaponizing altogether, collectively, the proof of weapons network. We can support real people based upon real values, not war-backed profits. And, we can back peaceful proof of work. We were given that gift. Now, of course, the warlords can use it too. But the more that is out of the system, the more decentralization, the more we can work, the more we can spend, the more we can build, the more we can back entrepreneurs that are building these different types of technologies that allow us to communicate in these decentralized networks, decentralized artificial intelligence, decentralized identity, take back control of our identity based upon this proof of work network. Resist all we can. Stop working. Like I left KBC in 2006, I understood what the network was, and started working on monetary reform. Then I was able to invest in companies. Then I was able to discover Bitcoin. That increased my wealth so that I could opt out of the system more, discover more, educate more. This is how we're going to win the system. This is how we're going to make the impact that we need to do. And all we need to do is follow the money, become conscious of the money. And by following the money, we can actually understand the power structures of the world. And while everyone's thinking that we're going into World War III, we were following the money at Bitcoin Hard Talk. And we knew that this wasn't World War III. This was all theatrics. And we were able to protect ourselves accordingly and not fall for some of the market manipulation of oil prices, because it is, at the end of the day, when you're dealing with the West, the only countries that are decolonizing themselves are finding a structure to remain sovereign. And by remaining sovereign, they're able to buy their way out of decolonization. This whole harmonious plan is coming together, and we just need to recognize that it's by increasing our wealth in the right way, we get to boycott the system, exert more power, and then build the next systems. And that is why I want you to share this with as many people as possible and recognize that we are alive at one of the most interesting and exciting times in financial history. If you're on the wrong side of this, it is the difference between life and death, as we're seeing. If you're on the right side of this, you can have the impact, you can control the monetary flows, and we can resist against this peacefully. We can do it with peace, love, and unity only by understanding and recognizing that power is money. Money is measuring this, and we can control the monetary flows, and we actually can collectively do that. And even if we do it just on the micro level, we can support our communities, and lots of micro makes up the macro. And that is the collective difference that we get to make. So I would like for you to subscribe to this channel, hit the bell symbol, hit all. I'm about 500 people away from 100,000 subscribers. I've been shadow banned because my message, they didn't want to get out there. But if we get to 100,000 subscribers, I get this to be reviewed. And just in case that review goes wrong, I've been documenting the whole journey from social banking to the creation of Bitcoin to everything in between. And covering every single week what happens in Bitcoin, macro, and geopolitics, so that you can transition to this world of Bitcoin, AI, central bank digital currencies, stable coins, and everything that's happening. But if you want real-time updates, follow me on X. Come and join me on a space. You can ask me a question, and I give all those real-time updates as well, and I go live stream there. In case that all goes wrong and I get taken out by that side as well, as we enter into these social credit scores, I'll also use Rumble, so follow me over there. And you can, if you want, download this on Apple Podcasts and on Spotify if you got an Android device, an alternative device. You can then watch this as you go by downloading it while you're going to the gym, while you're driving, whatever you do, you need in order to make sure you consume this each and every week, and you share this with as many people so that they can be prepared and ready, because they're going to rely on you, but there's going to be less people relying on you if you can give them economic power as well. Own more Bitcoin this month than the previous month. Do that for the next 4 years. I can't promise you the results, but I know what happened to everybody that did that in the 4 years, ever since I've been saying that since Bitcoin was $3. That's how we're able to have that impact. And you can buy yourself the freedom when your job is going to be taken away by artificial intelligence to be protected, because you're going to be on the universal basic income if you don't protect yourself accordingly. And it is going to be a stable coin or a central bank digital currency integrated into a social credit score, integrated into the technology that's being beta tested in Gaza, West Bank, Ukraine, UK, Saudi Arabia, European Union. And the big beautiful bill does usher in this surveillance state. And if you didn't watch part 1 and part 2, you'll know why. And with that, that's going to be everything for Bitcoin Hard Talk, episode 88, the big, beautiful war and surveillance bill. We will see you this time next week for Bitcoin Hard Talk, episode 89. And we'll always help you transition to this world of Bitcoin, AI, and central bank digital currencies that's becoming less of a conspiracy theory and an absolute reality theory. Peace.